trace the primal light. Let the clouds heal me of the stains, gently wipe the sorrow off my life. I dream.
Okay, guys, we're gonna go ahead and get started here. So this is going to be episode 80 of Tech Thursdays, the weekly show that I do on this channel every Thursday. We rarely miss any episodes. So far, we've done 80 episodes almost consecutively. I think there's like 2 exceptions where I wasn't able to make it for the Thursday show, and either we redo it on Friday or we just wait until the weekend. Yeah, today is binary day. Yeah, that's right. It's 10:10. Yeah, hey Dante. What's going on, everybody? So this stream is going to be focused primarily on the newly announced, and it is now public, so we can now discuss this openly, and that is going to be the topic of Intel's new upcoming Core Ultra processors on desktop. So these are going to be similar to Meteor Lake, which launched last year in mobile. So this is now the second generation. That is the reason why it is starting at 200 series instead of 100 series. I got that question a lot. People were asking, why is it not 100 series if they're doing a reset? It's because 100 was last year on mobile. And it was supposed to come to desktop, but they canceled it for whatever reason. It didn't pan out. So they're starting with 200 series. Basically, it's a reset. It has been a long time since Intel has done a brand change. So in terms of the product naming. So the Intel Core used to have a different name. If you guys remember, most people are probably familiar with the Intel Core i7, the Core i5, those CPUs, which have existed for more than a decade now. But prior to that, they had a different name. And I don't know how many of my viewers even know what the previous name of Intel's processors were. Before, they were known as the Intel Core i series. It's like i7, i5, and then later the i9. So originally, they were called the Intel Core 2 Duo and Intel Core 2 Quad, which is what they used as the naming convention from. It wasn't actually that long. It was really from like 2006 to 2009, at which point then they introduced the original i7. So and then prior to that, before the Core series, they used to call them the Intel Pentium processors and the Intel Celeron processors. So that's going like early 2000s with the Pentium processors. And then you go even further back, and then they didn't even have Pentium back then. So yeah, the late 90s was, I think the mid 90s, late 90s was when they introduced the Pentium brand. I forget when the Celeron was named a thing, and then that was more like the budget option, the low power option. There was also the Intel Atom for mobile. So Intel has been around the block a couple of times when it came to changing the product name. So this time around, they're keeping the Core name, but they're dropping the letter I. I'm not exactly sure the real reason why they're doing that, because I feel like the I branding, like i7, i9, I feel like that was a very familiar brand that a lot of people recognized. So by going away from that, now it's like you have to basically retrain the public and your entire audience on the branding. So now it's the Intel Core Ultra processor. Usually when something is ultra, there's a connotation of it being like extremely premium or like, you know what I mean? Like it exudes some level of performance and quality that the lower tier products can't match. But this time around, they're just calling it Core Ultra. I don't know. I feel like they're deflating the impact that the word ultra has. Ultra is typically a rarely used English adjective if we're getting very technical here, and we do go very technical on this channel. So if you like that sort of stuff, get subscribed to the channel. I think that's probably the only plug that I'm going to do for my own channel. But yeah, so they're calling it the Intel Core Ultra, and it's starting with a 200 series on desktop. The 100 series was last year, so that was Meteor Lake. or I guess you could think of it as this year, because technically this is launching in Q4, so this is really more of a next year product in terms of when you'll actually see the product ramp. And you won't really see this in pre-builds until the very end of this year, and most of them will be next year. So it is an interesting thing. I think a lot of people that watch my channel are probably waited a long time for this stream, to be honest. Not only did people wait for the motherboards, the X870E motherboard videos, which we've been doing. There's going to be a couple more videos on that topic, so stay tuned for that. But I think we haven't talked about Intel for a while. Intel's kind of kept quiet. They've always kind of been in the background. But, you know, the last BIOS for the Intel 13 and 14th Gen BIOS update came out today, at least if you're on Gigabyte. So I finally updated to the final BIOS. This was the final BIOS. You know, final with an asterisk this time, like it's supposed to be the last one. So I think we're finally done updating BIOSes on Raptor Lake. So now I can finally retest the 13900K and get the results to see how it performs now. So let's take a look at what Intel has prepared here with their slide deck. This is the transitional generation. So let's take a look at what they've got here. So this is an inflection point. This is where it's going to shift focus in terms of what you can expect from the CPUs on desktop going forward. So to start off here, this is the Arrow Lake S. I don't know what S means, but basically it's the desktop. I don't know why it's S, but Arrow Lake S and HX. HX is the mobile part, so that's going to be the one that goes in the laptops. Now, they're claiming enthusiast performance and AI enhanced. So to start off here, they've got up to 24 CPU cores. So that is going to be on the highest end SKU. That will be the Core Ultra 9 285K. I don't even know what's the colloquial way to say that product. I've heard a lot of people say 285K. I've heard a lot of people say 285K. I've heard 285K, which I think that's what I'm going to personally use when I'm referring to this processor, but I don't know if we actually know what the official way of pronouncing the name is. You know, it's like, how do you say the word determine? Do you say determine or do you say determine? It's one of those things. Is it the 285K or is it the 285K or the 285K? So anyway, 24 cores. That's going to be... It's going to consist of 16 SkyMod E cores. This means that the E cores on this CPU are completely different from the ones that you may be familiar with on the Raptor Lake CPUs, like the 13 and 14 Gen CPUs. Those featured the Gracemont cores, which were refined from the previous Gracemont on Alder Lake, which was the 12th gen. So now we're moving into a brand new architecture. It is politically incorrect to refer to this processor as 15th gen. If you say 15th gen and somebody from Intel hears you say that, they will be very quick to correct you, because that is politically incorrect to refer to this as the 15th gen. This is a full system reset. It isn't even manufactured by Intel's fabs this time around. That is how different this is. So 16 up to 16 SkyMont E cores, completely different. And now it has 8 Lion Cove P cores. So the maximum core count is 16E plus 8P. So a total of 24 cores. That actually is the exact same core count as the 13900K. Now, however, one of the things that is no longer a thing, or it's no longer a feature on these new Intel CPUs, is hyperthreading. These CPUs have no hyperthreading. That means that it is one thread per core only. So last time with the Raptor Lake CPUs, aka 13900K and all of its ilk, you had 8 performance cores that could do 2 threads per core. But the E cores could only handle one thread per core. So you had 8 plus 16, but then the 8 basically had Dragon Ball Z split technique. Split form is what I call it. So the 8 could actually do dual. So it was like 8/16 thread plus 16 more core threads. So you had 32 threads on a 13900K. That way, it would allow the 13900K to match AMD's 16-core Ryzen 9 flagship processor, because AMD, the 7950X and the 7950X3D, those CPUs have 16P cores, and they each have SMT, or simultaneous multi-threading, which is basically hyper-threading or very similar to it. So every AMD core can handle 2 threads, so you get 16 cores times 2, that's 32 threads. So basically, with last gen, Intel's top-end i9 could match AMD's Ryzen 9 flagship. That is not the case with these new Arrow Lake CPUs. The highest end will max out at 24 cores. So it's going to be interesting. This is going to be really, really interesting. Personally, I think the most interesting thing about the upcoming Arrow Lake is going to be the SkyMont E cores. So if you're somebody who did not like the E core on Raptor Lake or the E core on Alder Lake, well, I'm sorry to disappoint you, but the main selling point on this upcoming Intel CPU is going to be the new E cores. The E cores are where they see the biggest performance improvement compared to the previous generation. Now, the P cores do have some marginal improvement. Obviously, Intel, we're going to be talking about the power consumption, because the power consumption is probably another very interesting thing that stands out with this new CPU. But the P cores are not really going to be that different from the previous generation. So we're going to set expectations accordingly by pointing that out early on. So if you're somebody who was hoping for, massive improvements on the P cores, you're going to be disappointed or underwhelmed, because that's not going to be the case here. Keep in mind that Arrow Lake was originally designed for mobile laptops. This architecture was not designed for desktop computing. So they're basically taking a mobile part and they're transplanting it into a desktop environment, essentially. So they're going to run that means they're going to run the power much higher, and they're going to see what they can get out of the silicon. And it's actually pretty good overall in terms of how much margin they're able to pull out of what's essentially a mobile part, or what's designed for mobile and low power. So other things on here, it has AV1. Of course, it's got AV1 on there because it's using their Xe discrete. Well, it's not discrete, but it's got their Intel Arc graphics cores on here. You got 4 Xe cores. So if you think about Intel's graphics cards, like the A770, it has 4 of the discrete cores that would be in that type of GPU as integrated graphics. So quad pipe, dual, so it's got media engine. So interestingly enough, it also has, and here's another example of why this is a mobile part. So if you look here at the bottom, it has integrated Thunderbolt 4, which means the CPU will be able to match the new AMD motherboards in terms of the offerings on the back of the motherboard. So for example, we talked last week extensively about AMD's new X870E motherboards and how they all are mandatory in terms of including USB 4. That's like a mandate from AMD. So meaning every X870 motherboard, from the cheapest one all the way to the flagship ones, they all have USB 4. Now, with Arrow Lake, it has Thunderbolt 4, which is basically the same thing as USB 4. So that's your 40 gigabit USB-C port. So it has 2 integrated there. So that means that if you buy a new Z890 motherboard, which we aren't going to be talking about on this stream, we are going to talk about Z890 as we get closer to the launch of these things. So I do intend to do a really long live stream, just like I did last week, to cover the Intel motherboards, but that's not going to be on this live stream. So today we're going to only be focusing primarily on the new architecture and the CPUs themselves. But what you can tell from this, or what we can infer, is that all of the Z890 motherboards will offer Thunderbolt 4. It looks like it'll be 2 ports, which means it'll be very similar to USB 4 on AMD's motherboards. So we got platform parity there. But that's taken from mobile. So the other thing too that's a little bit less interesting is the AI TOPS performance up to 36 TOPS. I don't really know how relevant that is on desktop, because most people that are using desktops have discrete graphics cards from NVIDIA or AMD, and the graphics cards are going to always outperform the integrated NPU by orders of magnitude. So like if this thing is 36 TOPS, like an RTX 4060 is going to have like hundreds of TOPS compared to this thing. So not really that useful for desktop, because desktop will always favor the GPU, but we'll see. Intel Silicon Security Engine, that is like the FTPM on the AMD boards, and then it says here up to 2.5 gigabit Ethernet. So it looks like it offers 2.5 gig Ethernet now. I don't know. I'm trying to remember if the previous generation motherboards offered 2.5. I'm pretty sure they offered 2.5 on most Z790 boards. I'm pretty sure it was 2.5. So it looks like 2.5 gigabit Ethernet on here. And then it's got Threadripper for the E-cores. It's got Bluetooth and up to PCI Gen 5. So we will talk about the chipset in a little bit. The other thing too on the Wi-Fi that's interesting. So natively, Arrow Lake supports Wi-Fi 6E. It does not support Wi-Fi 7. It only supports Wi-Fi 6E. However, because it says discrete Wi-Fi 7, that means that the motherboard manufacturers can still offer Wi-Fi 7, but they would be through a separate vendor, like for example Qualcomm or MediaTek, or somebody who makes the Wi-Fi 7 chips. They can still offer those, but keep in mind that will drive up the price of the boards. So I would say overall, expect the Z890 motherboards to be at parity with the X870E motherboards. And then the benefit of having a single chipset, so in this case, Intel is only offering one chipset, which is Z890, whereas AMD has, X870, and then they have X870E, which is like a dual X870 motherboard. So by offering only one, it's up to the motherboard manufacturers to scale their board up or down in terms of price. So they can sell you a Z890 that is fully loaded with like everything enabled, or they can just cheap out and give you like a budget board that still has the exact same chip, but they just leave a whole bunch of stuff on the table and unutilized. So you're going to see a lot of like variance and variation in terms of the price points on these Z890 boards as a result of that. Okay, so program goals for Arrow Lake. Number one, the highest priority for this platform is performance per watt. They focused very, very heavily on cutting the power consumption down, bringing the power consumption down in a significant way that was noticeable. We're not talking about, it uses like, 10 watts less here or there. No, we're talking about like significant power reduction, because that was the Achilles heel of the Raptor Lake processors. And quite frankly, that is the reason why I never used my 13900K as a gaming / streaming machine. The consumption was too obnoxious, and I'm somebody who only uses air coolers no matter what. And I can tell you guys, I have ran the 13900K for the 2 years that I had this processor. I have been running it with a Noctua NH-D14, not D15, D14, the really old one. I have been running it on this with this CPU since day one, and it instantly goes to 100 degrees when trying to render videos. It's obnoxiously loud. I can't control it. I mean, you can try to undervolt it, but then now you're losing a lot of your performance. So it's just, no, it was never a good thing. I could never use it as a streaming machine. It would just be too loud and too annoying because I'd be sitting there and the Noctua fan would be going at 100% all the time, just whining and whining and whining. And I was like, this isn't going to work, guys. So that is the reason why 1300K, it was kind of a joke. Unless you were using it for like a kind of like server sort of thing, which is what a lot of game companies did. They would use those in data centers so they would never have to listen to them with those air coolers. And then that's the reason why they had the whole, we all know about the whole VMin problem, you know, like the CPU dying because of overvolting. You know, that was a thing that happened in the last several months, or basically throughout this entire year. But that's supposed to be resolved now with these BIOS updates. But the point is, reduce the power consumption. That was like program goal number one. That was like the main engineering goal, was bring the power consumption down. So, next, deliver greater than 15% generational multi-threaded performance. That was like number two, while maintaining gaming performance. Now, this last one is the one where I think the gaming population is going to be a little bit underwhelmed, because one of the goals of Arrow Lake was to maintain gaming performance. It's like contain the gaming performance as it is. Don't let it slip, but also don't improve it in any noticeable way. So these were the three main goals. And then for the user experience, expand AI acceleration to the enthusiasts. So bring AI. Don't improve gaming, but expand AI. And then integrate XELPG. I don't know what XE. That's the graphics. Okay, for the latest media. Okay, so they basically brought ARC to the integrated graphics. Okay, reduce package temperature by about 10 degrees Celsius while gaming. So that was basically the goals from a user standpoint. And what I just talked about a few minutes ago when I was talking about how the Noctua was pegged at 100% fan speed, and the thing was really loud, and the CPU was at 100 degrees or 102 degrees, and overheating and thermal throttling instantly while rendering videos. So that is a bad user experience. So that is what they mean when they say reduce package temperature by 10 degrees while gaming, because this also impacts productivity when you're actually pegging the entire CPU at like 95% to 100% CPU utilization. So, okay. So, basically 6 goals. All right, so let's talk about the performance uplifts here. So on the left-hand side, we have the E cores. On the right-hand side, we have the P cores. On the left, we have a massive, now keep in mind, take this with a grain of salt. This is from Intel's official numbers. This is not third-party testing. This is Intel's testing. So they're claiming 32% IPC uplift over Grace Mod when it comes to the SNU SkyMod E core. And this is what I mean when I was saying at the beginning of the stream that the E core is where all the action is at. All of Intel's efforts went into improving the E core. So the E cores got basically the lion's share of the IPC gain. So they got 32% IPC uplift on their efficiency cores. So that is massive. And this is actually the reason why when we start looking at the multi-thread performance, the multi-thread performance is actually quite impressive considering that they no longer have hyper-threading available, which means when this CPU goes up against a 14900K or an AMD 9950X, this CPU is going to be at a thread deficit against those CPUs because it's going to be 24 thread versus 32 thread in the benchmarks, but they're claiming 32%, so they're going to need all that uplift that they can get on these E-cores when it comes to those multi-thread benchmarks. 2x AI throughput, So enhanced prediction to find instructions faster, wider allocation. So this is basically the behind the scenes of how they're able to get that 32% deeper queuing for better parallelism. Again, multi-thread performance, scalable and flexible across multiple implementations. That means mobile and desktop. So on the right-hand side, we have the Lion Cove. This is the new P core. So this thing had a 9% IPC uplift over the Raptor Cove, and it's not that different. So when you look at the actual die, the compute die, the fundamental layout is going to look almost exactly the same if you overlay it on top of the Raptor Cove. But they did get 9% uplift. Now, the reason why this is not going to be that impressive is because though they did get 9% IPC improvement, they run the clock speeds lower. So there is a clock speed regression. So you combine the IPC increase with a clock speed regression, so it kind of evens out. So what that means is that the single thread won't be as impressive compared to the multi-thread. The multi-thread is going to be very impressive considering the thread deficit on this. Enhanced memory subsystem with 3 megabyte L2 cache. Okay, wider scheduling. So basically what I'm interpreting from reading the P-Core stuff and also some of the E-Core stuff, they're doing what AMD did when it came to changing from Zen 4 to Zen 5. They're going more wide on the pipeline. They're going deeper on the branch predictor and that kind of thing. And that is exactly what AMD did with Zen 5. So both AMD and Intel are doing essentially the same thing. They're both basically trying to reset to, like, they're basically recalibrating the trajectory for the future in terms of how they're going to work on their CPUs. So Intel, it seems like it's very similar to what AMD did with Zen 5 here. Oh, for 4K gaming on X870E, would you recommend 48 gigabyte at 8000 for? I would do 48. Well, it depends on your CPU, but yeah, 48 gigabyte 8000 is going to be, unless you don't care about like 1-to-1 versus 1-to-2, and if your CPU can't do 1-to-1 6400, then you're better off 8000 1-to-2 48 gigabytes, because that is much easier to do, believe it or not. I have lots of videos on that. I don't have a single Ryzen CPU that can actually do 1-to-1 stable at 64 gigabytes. So, yeah, I would definitely recommend 48 gigabyte 8000. If you're going gaming, 48 gigabyte 8000 is probably the new, like, best in slot. To use Final Fantasy XIV RAID terminology, 8000 megatransfer RAM, 48 gigabytes or 2x24 at that speed, that's going to be best in slot, because it's relatively easy to obtain versus trying to get your CPU running at 1-to-1 ratio at 6400, because 1-to-2 8000 beats 1-to-2 6400. So just keep that in mind. Okay, so scaling Skymont and Lion Cove to gaming PCs. So this is basically going over the chiplet. So this is basically Intel's first attempt at chiplet. It's not their first attempt at chiplet. They did this with Meteor Lake, which is why this is called the Core Ultra 200, because Core Series 100 was last year. This is actually their second version, but it's the first time they're bringing it to desktop. So it's the first attempt at the chiplet stuff. So what that means, we don't actually know like what latencies are going to be like compared to the previous generation. I assume that latency is going to be higher because it has to traverse through the base tile to basically get all over the place on this thing. So there's a little bit more travel in terms of the signaling versus Raptor Lake. And that might be the reason why you're not going to see like a massive uplift in gaming, as we're going to look at shortly. But it looks like they also did slight redesign to the IHS. They also redesigned the ILM on the motherboard. So there's actually 2 different ILMs now. So just keep that in mind. So if you are planning on trying to get one of the Z890 motherboards, you're probably going to want to look for the one that has the newer ILM, because the older ILM causes the IHS to bow inward like this, so you do not get as good of a contact between the heatsink and the IHS. So that is something to be aware of. So here are the products, and now we actually have the official. Now these are not the products that you'll see in the store or on like Amazon or Newegg. It's gonna be more than this. This is, I don't like how Intel always does this. They always show the what they call the tray pricing. Even though it says suggested ETEL price, this is the tray price. So I would expect it to be a little bit more than this. Like for example, I think the Core Ultra 9 will be $629. In like the box processor, not the tray. This is the tray. So like if someone was buying a tray of these for a data center, for example, this is the price that they would pay per CPU. But you can see, 24 core, 24 thread, and it just goes all the way down to 14. So there isn't an insane amount of variance anymore with their core and thread count because they no longer have hyperthreading. So it's an interesting choice to no longer use hyperthreading. But again, the reason why they can get away without hyperthreading is because their E-cores are so much faster than they were before. They don't at launch. They don't at launch. I expect when these launch, the Micro Center price for the Ultra 9 is probably going to be $629. Okay, so Intel Core Ultra 200S series, flagship gaming FPS. So they're claiming here they're being very honest. They're being honest with this. So for the gaming FPS, they literally say here parity versus the Intel Core i9 14900K and AMD Ryzen 9 9950X. So they're claiming that, in terms of gaming, the new Intel Ultra Core i9 is going to match the AMD Ryzen 9 9950X and the Intel i9 14900K. So that will be... that's the thing that I think a lot of people are making those memes. I've seen those memes about like... what are they calling it? The Intel Core negative 2.5 or negative 2.85%. It's like negative 2.85% and then Zen 5% and then Intel negative 2.85%. I don't know where people are getting those numbers from, but it's basically at parity. So what this means is that if you're somebody who is currently on a Z790, there isn't really much of a reason to upgrade to this. I mean, and I applaud Intel for being fully transparent about that. Like, they're setting the expectations properly if this is indeed true. And I don't see why they would lie. I mean, it's not like Intel has ever lied in the past, right? Well, I'm being facetious there, but they're setting expectations correctly because they don't want somebody to go out, like if somebody has a 14900K today that they purchased either earlier this year or last year when it launched. A year ago was when the 14900K launched. So if somebody has the longest amount of time someone could have currently had a 14900K is 1 year or 12 months. So if that individual goes out and buys a new Intel Ultra because they think that they're upgrading, just to find out that they're, in a lot of cases, they're actually losing performance in some of the games, depending on the game, or they're at parity for like most of the games, I don't think they're going to be too happy about that. It's not really going to feel like an upgrade. On top of that, when they open up their Windows Task Manager, they're going to see that they no longer have 32 threads, because now they only have 24 threads. So now it looks like a Ryzen 9 9900X. It's like, what happened? It's going to be kind of a weird thing. So I think it's right for Intel to set the expectations appropriately. For 4K gaming on X870E, would you recommend that? I already answered that. I thought I answered that earlier. So I said 48 gigabytes at 8,000. Especially if you're on X870E. All right, fastest multi-thread. So they're claiming up to, there it goes, up to. It's like that wombo combo with that up smash, you know, up to 13%. That doesn't mean average. That's not geo mean. That's not average. You know, that's like, that is up to. That means like best case. You know what I'm saying? So they are really trying to temper the expectations appropriately. I think they're doing the right thing by doing that. Because, you know, they don't tell you what game, but, you know, they're setting the expectations appropriately. But here's what's cool about it. So, okay, the two things on the left are really not that great. What's interesting is the two things here in the middle. So cooler and quieter, up to 17 degrees lower. So that means it runs cooler, which means I can finally use this thing with my Noctua air cooler, and I don't have to worry about it melting anymore. Fantastic. So that's really good. So, but again, they're comparing it to a 14900K during active PC gaming. So whatever that means. The other thing too is I don't know what, like, from what type of cooler are they deriving this number? Are they deriving this from a 360 AIO? Are they deriving this from a air cooler like a Noctua? Are they deriving it from a custom loop? Probably not a custom loop, if I had to guess. This is probably a 240 or 280 millimeter AIO, if we're trying to assume like middle of the road. All right, so ultra efficient gaming, up to 165 watts, lower system power versus the 14900K. So again, during active PC gaming. So all those people out there that are playing like, you know, like those power virus games like BeamNG or whatever, like they're probably gonna notice that there's a massive reduction in heat and fan noise from their PC when they're playing those type of games, because this is using, you know, potentially up to 165 watts less. So that is actually really good. And then of course they have the little AI thing. Okay, a cooler and a quieter flagship. So here we go. Here are the numbers. I don't know why there's... Didn't they just claim up to 165 and now it says 188? I don't know why there's two different numbers. Anyway, here we go. This is it. Here are the numbers. The geometric mean, and they tested 31 games. 31 games. So out of 31, across 31 games, that's a lot of games. Okay, that's a lot. -5% was the geometric mean. You can tell when you're skeptical just by your voice inflection. Up to, well, yeah, because you don't actually know what did they actually, you know, like what was the game that was doing up to 165? Maybe we'll see that later, but you know, I don't actually know, right? Like it's kind of vague. So, but here they go. Geometric mean across 31 games tested, -5% in gaming. There we go. And this is probably where the memes are going to come from, and people are going to make fun of this thing. And it's unfortunate, but it is what it is. -5%. But it is 15 degrees cooler. Geometric mean across 31 games. And up to 188 watts lower total system power. So that is actually quite interesting. All right, so here are, like, what is this? So this is all like, oh, okay, so this is actually really good. So here they show you the product segmentation breakdown. So it looks like only the Ultra 9. So it looks like Intel Thermal Velocity Boost Frequency, or the TVB, or TVF, or TVBF, whatever. Thermal velocity boost which is basically like Intel's version of PBO on AMD. So AMD has, precision boost overdrive. Intel has something called thermal velocity boost. However, it looks like they are locking this down to as an exclusive feature reserved for only the Ultra 9 285K. None of the other ones offer or have access to this feature, which is really weird and quite disappointing, if I'm being honest. I'm surprised that the Ultra 7, which is usually the best value from Intel, does not get that feature. It says NA, not applicable. So it looks like thermal velocity boost is exclusive to the Ultra 9. This is an example of how they try to upsell you to a more expensive SKU that barely improves performance. However, most people that are looking at the Ultra 9 are probably going to be using it for productivity, whereas I think for the gaming people, the Ultra 5 and the Ultra 7 are probably going to be much better value. But this is an example of how they lock it down, where if you want that thermal velocity boost frequency for overclocking, for example, and tuning, it is now exclusively Ultra 9. So that is unfortunate. However, Intel Turbo Boost technology, that's always been on every Intel CPU. Now it looks like that is only allowed on the Ultra 9 and the Ultra 7. It looks like the Ultra 5 also does not have Turbo Boost, which is really bizarre because Turbo Boost has existed on i5s all the way back to Sandy Bridge. So it is very disappointing to see that the Ultra 5 is losing a feature that it has had for more than a decade. I wonder what the reason for that is. That is weird. So, okay, it looks like the Ultra 5 does not have Turbo Boost, which means that it only can go up to 5.2 gigahertz on its P core, and it looks like the maximum E-core turbo is 4.6. So it looks like in terms of clock frequency, the E-cores have gained 300 megahertz over the previous generation, because the E-cores previously ran at 4.3 gigahertz. Now they can run at 4.6 gigahertz. And when we look at the P-cores, the P-core has actually seen a 300 megahertz clock speed regression, because the P-core max turbo, which is traditionally the single core, your top two cores could boost to that number, on the 13900K, that number was 5.8 gigahertz. Now it looks like it can only boost to 5.5 gigahertz. So there is a clock speed regression. However, with thermal velocity boost, if you do use TVB, you can get one core to typically touch 5.7 gigahertz. So that's kind of like a 9950X, because I can tell you guys, because I obviously, we're using this and I've got this, so I know exactly how they both behave. And what I can tell you is this thing, the two best cores on the faster CCD boost to 5.7 gigahertz. So it looks like Intel's new CPU, the boost behavior is going to be a lot like Zen 5, believe it or not. So that is really interesting. However, their Core Ultra 7 and especially Core Ultra 5, very disappointing. They do not have access to Turbo Boost on the Core Ultra 5, and they do not have TVB on the Ultra 7. So they are locking out specific enthusiast features from the Ultra 7, which I think is very, that's not good, to be honest. It's not a good look, considering the competitor, in this case AMD, it doesn't lock down any of this stuff. If you want to do PBO, you want to do PBO on the lowest end, like 9600X, go for it. Like, you can do it. AMD doesn't care. Like, go do it, whatever. You want PBO, you want curve shaper, you want curve optimizer, we got it all, like across the entire product stack. So AMD does not do this sort of product segmentation, whereas Intel, clearly what they're trying to do here, this, at least to me, the way I interpret this, is they're trying to upsell people to the Ultra 9 for certain features. Kind of like how motherboards reserve the asynchronous B clock on X870E and X670E for the higher tier motherboards or the flagship boards. That's an example of upselling on a certain feature. So Intel's doing that with their CPUs, which is, it's not a really good move, considering AMD doesn't lock it down like this, but it is what it is, and that's what they're going to do. So the GPU, the Arc Xe cores, can boost up to 2 gigahertz on the Ultra 7 and Ultra 9, and then on the Ultra 5, it boosts only to 1.9, so 100 megahertz slower on the Ultra 5. They all have the same base speed. They all have the exact same NPU. They all have 24 lanes of PCIe. However, that is not PCIe Gen 5. That is a mix of Gen 5 and Gen 4. We will go over the breakdown later. And then here is another thing that is improved, although we don't really know what this means. Maximum JEDEC DRAM, which is typically LPDDR5. This is DDR5 6400, but there could be some caveats there. This is probably only supported on a 2-DIMM motherboard. So keep that in mind. This is going to be on a 2-DIMM motherboard. So if you buy a 4-DIMM Z890 board, the official maximum supported speed is 5600. Not 6400. You have to have a 2-DIMM board like a ROG cross, or, well, that's AMD, but Maximus is the Intel equivalent. So Maximus Apex, if you have a Maximus Apex, which has 2 DIMMs only, the maximum supported speed per Intel is 6400 on the RAM. Anything above that on a 2-DIMM board is considered overclocking, and that is not covered under warranty by Intel, and that is also not supported by Intel. So just keep that in mind. And if you're running a 4-DIMM motherboard, which most people will be, even if you're only using 2 DIMMs and you're leaving the other 2 DIMM slots empty, the maximum official supported speed per Intel is 5600. Anything above 5600, just like with Zen 5, is considered overclocking and is not supported. Maximum memory channels, 2 channel. Maximum memory capacity, 192 gigabytes of RAM. Now, some people are going to look at this and they're going to get very confused, because this does not mean, as much as this looks like it says 6400, 192 gigabyte, that is not the case. If you run 192 gigabytes of DDR5 on a 4-DIMM motherboard with this new Core Ultra CPU, the official maximum speed is 3600 mega transfers. So I want to make that very clear, because I feel like a lot of people are going to look at this, they're going to be like, oh, I can go out and spend a lot of money on 192 gigs of RAM rated at 6400 XMP. They're going to buy that, they're going to try to run it, and it's not going to boot, or it's going to be unstable, and it's going to corrupt their operating system, and they're going to be confused as to what's going on. But it's because they're running an unsupported configuration. So I want to point that out, make that very clear. 192 gigabytes DDR5 does not mean you can run 192 gigabytes at 6400, even though that, I can see why a lot of people might look at this and they might think that, but there are some massive asterisks on these points. All right, then they've got the whole like vPro for virtualization and security management, that kind of stuff for enterprise. 9800 X3D will most likely be 10. Da, 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 da. Yeah. So Intel's trying to avoid talking about X3D. I'm not going to talk about X3D too much because I feel like that'll be doing Intel a disservice because they just announced this product. So you want to show off the product as it is. You don't want to immediately start showing, like X3D, because X3D is basically going to make the CPU, if we're being honest, for gaming, is going to kind of make the CPU look irrelevant because it's going to be very expensive, especially if you're going for the Ultra 9. But there are some things where the CPU does good compared to the previous generation. So the cooler and more efficient gaming CPU. Same performance at half the power of Raptor Lake. So Skymont and Lion Cove team up for impressive perf per watt gains, highest multi-thread performance, up to 24 cores for industry-leading compute throughput on desktop. There's an asterisk there because what Intel actually showed behind the scenes under NDA, what they did was they actually showed they took a 9950X, a 14900K, and the new Intel Ultra 9, and they basically went into the BIOS and they power limited all three CPUs to not be able to exceed 125 watts. So they capped all three at 125 watts, and what they showed was that the Intel Core Ultra performed the best in multi-thread benchmarks when capped at 125 watts. So, but they didn't really say the actual number. They basically showed like a thing where it's like, I think, if I remember correctly, they showed like the Cinebench number or like R24 or something. And they're like, hey guys, look, when you power limit all three CPUs to 125, you can basically get the best score with the new Ultra. I mean, obviously, Intel's 14th gen is going to lose because when you power limit it that severely, it's going to lose a lot of performance. I've already shown this in a video. AMD will also lose some performance, but not as severely as the Raptor Lake. Feature-rich enthusiast performance, blah, blah, blah. Okay. You switched to AMD 12 weeks ago. You're not looking back. Well, I mean, Intel wants you to look back. They want you to look back. It's like, hey man, where'd you go? What's the difference between eSkyMod and Xe cores? E-core is a CPU core. Xe is a graphics card or a GPU core, and the P core is the performance core. So we'll look at that a little bit later here. So, okay, so this is again the performance efficiency. So again, they're showing 50 up to 58% lower package power. So notice a lot of these slides are heavily emphasizing power consumption improvements. So reduction in power, reduction in heat, reduction in cooling, fan noise, all those are good things. So they're making a big deal about the energy efficiency because they know that that is where everybody dogged on Raptor Lake for the last 2 years. You know, people kept on, the memes about the power consumption and, it's like it turns your room into a sauna. Your gaming cave is basically unlivable. It's like you're flying too close to the sun. Like all those memes when Raptor Lake first came out. The 102 degrees, thermal throttling, blah, 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 all that stuff. Oh, you can't use an air cooler with it, and that's absolutely ridiculous. And I agree with that because I only use air coolers with it, regardless of what the power consumption is. So, all those type of criticisms, that's why there's a lot of emphasis on the energy efficiency here. All right, leadership core performance. So here, oh, whoops. I lost my slide. Where was I? Okay, here we go. So leadership core performance. Geometric mean about 8% faster 1T performance versus the prior generation. And about 4% faster in 1T performance versus the competition. So here, what this is showing is this white line is where the 14900K would land. And then the red is the 9950X from AMD, and then the new blue line you can see is the new Intel Core Ultra 9. So this is Geekbench over here. It looks like Geekbench single thread, the 9950X is the fastest at 8% faster than the 14900K, and the Intel Ultra 9 is 5% faster than the 14900K. And then you look at what is this, SPE Crate 2017. I'm not familiar with this benchmark, but this one, it looks like it is 6% faster than the previous generation, whereas AMD's 950X was only 2% faster. And then we have Cinebench R24. This is the single thread Cinebench score. It looks like it is about 8% faster than Raptor Lake, whereas the Zen 5 was 2% faster in single thread versus Raptor Lake. And then 3D Mark, it's got about 11% over Raptor Lake. So obviously, you know, when they show like 4 things, they're cherry picking the better ones. So you're not going to see the regression against Raptor Lake, because why would they show you regressions against Raptor Lake, especially in productivity? And then here, what they've done is the compute. This is the multi-thread performance. And again, like I said at the beginning of the stream, the E-cores are where most of the efforts went, because they wanted to improve the multi-thread performance, because they're removing hyper-threading. So they're no longer doing hyper-threading, which means now you have to somehow like make up for that. You know what I mean? Like if you remove 8 threads from Raptor Lake, from the 13900K, what do you think is going to happen to the Cinebench score? Well, it's going to go down. It's not going to score as good as if it had access to the hyperthreads. But because they have gone above and beyond in making those E-cores so much better than the previous generation, now, even though they have a thread deficit against the 14900K, they're able to push beyond that and still beat the 14900K in the multi-thread benchmarks. So that is actually really interesting to see, to be honest. Like, this is actually the most impressive thing about the new CPU. It's actually the E-cores. So now, okay, again, so here they kind of show like how it scales with reduction in power. So if you power limit, they basically show that the other 2 processors lose more performance as you power limit them versus the new Intel CPU. So again, this makes sense, because remember what we said at the very beginning of the stream. This architecture was initially designed for mobile, for laptops. That is what this was designed for initially, and they're bringing it to desktop. So you would expect, if it was designed for low power for mobile, as you bring back the power, like you clock it down where it can't go more than like 65 watts, for example, which is what they're showing over here, you would expect it to outperform 2 parts that were designed for desktop, that were designed to not care about battery life. So that is the reason. So it's I mean, it's cool to see it. I mean, it's kind of a no-brainer, right? Like, it's okay, if you understand it's a mobile design, then yeah, obviously it's going to beat the other 2 when you reel it into 65 watts. So the one thing about this, though, is they're not actually showing X3D here, because X3D is another one that is really, really energy efficient. So that's not really mentioned here. What are we talking about? Like, the chat is saying, you say it again, who wants system only for game when close my eyes by What? 9950 X3D. Yeah, 9950 X3D is well, it's not out yet. So it's like, how do we know? Do you have a link on how you can build a full PC? I mean, I did like a couple of videos. All the live streams were me building the PC. Like we did one a week and a half ago. Now, I don't go through all the steps because it was really just, like me talking to chat while building a PC. So I don't really know if I would... what you can do, search... Okay, on my channel, search for the Steel Legend. Search for the X670E Aorus Steel Legend, and you should find like a PC build video that I did. And that one shows you like how to apply the thermal paste, how to install the RAM, all that stuff. That should be in that video from last year. Arrow Lake delivers exceptional energy efficiency. Leadership CPU core performance in Enthusiast Desktop up to 19% more. What is this? NT per previous gen? Okay. Up to 58%. So this is basically they're repeating what they said at the beginning. Elite gaming experience. So this is the one where I don't know if... I honestly think they should not have made this slide. I think this slide shouldn't be here. Considering what they showed previously, I don't think this slide should be here. Elite gaming experience, guys. You heard it here first. Okay, one giant leap. One giant leap in gaming per watt. Here we... Oh, okay. I get it. I get what they're saying. Okay, it's not a giant leap in gaming. It doesn't say one giant leap in gaming. It says... They should have put this in all caps. One giant leap in gaming perf per watt. Perf per watt. Okay? Keep that in mind. Here we go. They're showing the numbers. They're being very transparent. They're showing a lot of games. So the white line up here represents the 14900K. So in Far Cry 6... The new Intel Core Ultra is 13% slower than the 14 and 13 900K. In Final Fantasy XIV Dawn Trail, it is this one is very surprising to me, and this is actually very, very disappointing to me. As somebody who actively plays Final Fantasy XIV, that is the only MMO that I actually play. I'm actually subscribed to that game. So I play this game, and to see it lose to the 1400K by almost 10% is very disappointing, because Final Fantasy XIV is a very CPU-bound game. It is an MMO. Anybody that plays 14 knows exactly what I'm saying when I say go to Limsa Lominsa on one of the heavy populated servers like Gilgamesh. Go hang out at Balmung, Limsa Lominsa. And if you're anybody that knows anything about Final Fantasy, you know exactly what I'm saying. If you're on a 7-year-old CPU, good luck at your sub 30 FPS at Limsa Lominsa. So to see this lose in Final Fantasy to a 14900K, to essentially a 2-year-old architecture, is extremely disappointing. Then we have F124, so I don't play that, so I don't really know, but 7% less. Red Dead Redemption 2, it loses in Red Dead Redemption 2, guys. Red Dead Redemption 2, negative 4%? What? Shadow of the Tomb Raider, it says on par. However, look at it's actually less. They don't give you the number, but it's actually less. Total War Pharaoh, I don't play that game, so I have no idea. But they are pointing out, hey, even though it's slower, it's only pulling, 58 watts. I mean, we're not going to mention that the 7800 X3D only uses like 40 watts in that game, but okay. And then Metro Exodus, it's also losing by a tiny amount, probably -1%, -2% in Metro Exodus. So they're claiming on par. Cyberpunk 2077, it looks like it is -1 to equal in Cyberpunk 2077. Black Myth Wukong, it looks like it's negative 1%, but they're claiming it only uses 34 watts in Black Myth Wukong. Oh, I wonder why it only pulls 34 watts in Black Myth Wukong. Could it be that that's a GPU-bound game? Maybe because that game is the most GPU-bound game ever made currently. Okay, 34 watts, yeah. Okay, Tom Clancy's Rainbow Six Siege, it actually wins by 1 to 2% based off of this chart. So here it's on par. And then Warhammer Space Marines 2. This is a brand new game that I actually enjoyed playing, Space Marines 2. I got Space Marines 2 for free when I purchased the 9950X. In fact, if you buy a 9000 series Ryzen or 7000 series Ryzen or a Radeon 7000 series GPU, you get Space Marines and Unknown 9 for free. So, I mean, that's probably going to go away at the end of this month. Just know that currently you can get those games for free. And that's the Steam version. It's the premium version. So, yeah, but it actually wins by 4%, and it looks like it's pulling 165 watts. So they're claiming system power. I'm confused, like what these 34 watt system power doesn't make sense, because in Black Myth Wukong, the GPU is going to be pulling way more than like the total system being 34 watts. So I don't really know why this says system power. And then Age of Mythology Retold. Now we're seeing some improvements. Now it's 6% faster. Oh, you know what? Okay, I get it. This is not the power. This is a reduction in power. Okay, this little triangle means minus. It means it's reduction. Okay, so that makes sense. So Black Myth Wukong minus, it's using 34 watts less total system power. In Space Marines 2, it's 165 watts less. That is actually really nice. And then in Age of Mythology, 136 watts less total system power. So there are some pretty good gains. They outline these four because these are the most impressive ones. Okay, Sid Meier's Civilization 6 Gathering Storm. This one is up to 11% faster. So, okay, so here, this one is also a very CPU-bound game. These strategy games, like Civilization 6, are very CPU heavy. So here it got some pretty good improvements. So 11% faster. And then in F123, you know what's really weird though? F123, the older game, it's 15% faster, but the newer F124, it's 7% slower. So that is a really weird dynamic just to see that. So I don't really understand that. I don't play the F1 game, so I actually have no idea what the difference between F123 and F124 are in terms of like how CPU heavy those games are. But this is interesting to see, like, okay, if on average it looks like it's on par. Aerolix slashes gaming power again with the power reduction. So geometric mean, it shows. Okay, so they show some of the other games. Assassin's Creed Mirage, was that on here? That actually wasn't on here. So I wonder, like, what does that actually... Well, anyway, Call of Duty also uses 54 watts less total system power. So, but they didn't show the actual FPS numbers. So geometric mean, on average, it is 73 watts less while gaming for the total system power consumption. So again, here they're showing kind of your gaming performance because they're talking about FPS. So it is on par. So it looks like across all the games that they tested, the 14900K averaged around 264, and the total system, I guess this is the average total system power consumption, was 527 watts. And then we have On the new Intel Core Ultra, it is 261 FPS. So on average, depending on what they're talking about, it's 3 FPS slower, but the total system power consumption is only 447 watts instead of over 500 watts with the Raptor Lake. Yeah, well, you're right, but we're not going to talk about that right now. We're not going to talk about 7800X3D. I mean, you're correct, because one could look at these numbers. See, here's the thing. Like, if somebody really wanted to figure it out, like, someone could take all these games, they could go look at what the benchmarks for the 7800X3D are versus a 14900K, and from that they can derive where the 7800X3D would land. You know what I mean? So, but yeah, we're not going to talk about 7800X3D on here, because that's, I won't say it's off topic, but I don't know if it's like, I don't know if it's a right comparison, because the Ultra 9, this is going to be more than $600 when it comes out. So, like, if someone's going to buy an Intel Ultra 9 285K, they're going to spend, $630 on launch day. That is significantly more money than a 7800X3D. So that's why I don't really like to compare the two, because I don't feel like that's not a fair comparison. The more proper comparison would be the Ultra 7 versus the 7800X3D. Or soon it will be against the 9800X3D. Alright, cooler and quieter gaming with Arrow Lake. Okay, that's nice. We already talked about this. So, I want to see. So, Final Fantasy. I really like that they show Final Fantasy 14. Because all these other games, I don't play any of these other games. I don't care about any of these games. So, it's like, this is kind of irrelevant. I will forget these numbers, but I will not forget this number. So, Raptor Lake was averaging 60 degrees Celsius while playing Final Fantasy 14. But the new Intel Core Ultra is at 50 degrees Celsius. So that is actually really nice. Okay, and here it is against... Oh, now they're showing Battle of the Titans. Wow, I like how they titled this slide. See, they know how to hype people up. This is how you build the hype. Battle of the Titans. And they put the Titans in bold. Gamers win when competition is fierce. So now we get to see how it compares to the 9950X. So this is a very good comparison, because this is the correct comparison. See, the wrong comparison would have been the 7800 or the 7950X3. If I was the manager, if I was the product manager at Intel, and I tasked one of my employees on my team, like a marketing specialist, for example, if I tasked them to make a comparison slide, if that individual tested against a 7800X3D, I would fire them. They would not have a job anymore, because that is not how you do a Battle of the Titans. You would compare to the 9950X, because that is the correct comparison, because that is the price competitive equivalent of the Ultra 9. So this is good. The employee did a good job. So good job. This is a true Battle of the Titans. So, 9950X. So, how does it do? In Cyberpunk 2077, the new Intel Ultra 9 is 13% slower than the 9950X. In Red Dead Redemption 2, it is 11% slower. In Final Fantasy 14, it is 10% slower. That is a game that matters to me. In F124, it is 7% slower. In F123, it is 4% slower. So this is interesting because F123, when compared to the 14900K, the Intel Core Ultra 9, that is going to take some getting used to saying that. The Core Ultra 9 is, what was it, 14% faster? What was the actual number? I forgot what the number was. 15% faster. So hold on a second. Wait a minute. Hold the phone. This thing was 7% slower against the 14900 in F124, but it was 15% faster in F123. Now, when it goes up against its rival, it is now 4% slower in F123. What? Now I need to know what... Wait, what? That's confusing. How does it go from being 15% faster than a 14900K to now being in the same game, it is now 4% slower than the 9950X? What? Okay, I don't know where that number came from. That's weird. Anyway, Total War Pharaoh on par. They are dead even. Black Myth Wukong, they are on par. They are dead even. Far Cry 6, they are on par, but it looks like it is about 1% faster in Far Cry 6. Shadow of the Tomb Raider, again, it looks like it is 1% faster. Star Wars Outlaws, it's like 1%. It's like a little bit above, so 1%. Metro Exodus is like it's 2%. Tom Clancy's Rainbow Six Siege is now 4%. Age of Mythology Retold. This is a RTS game, so this one is actually very CPU heavy. 6% faster. Civ 6, it is 11% faster. So similar to how it was 11% faster than the 14900K, it is also 11% faster in this game. And then Total War, Warhammer 3, Mirrors of Madness. I don't know what that is. That's probably another strategy game. A whopping 28% faster, although there is an asterisk against this game, as well as Tom Clancy. They're claiming that they used Intel APO. I do not know what Intel APO is. Apparently they turned that on. And then it says on par is plus or minus 3%. Results may vary. Okay, so here, one thing though, I do want to point out. So notice here, they are not bragging, they're not advertising the reduction in power consumption, which means that the power consumption on the new Intel Ultra is probably very similar to the new AMD Zen 5 in gaming. Now, here we go, a balanced enthusiast experience. So, against the 7950X3D and this is 1080p gaming. Was those other ones 1080p gaming? Yes, this was 1080p gaming. These are all 1080p results for those wondering. So 1080p, Cyberpunk 2077, it is 21% slower than a 7950X3D. In Far Cry 6, it is 13% slower. In Assassin's Creed Mirage, it is about 3 to 4% slower. And Tom Clancy's Rainbow Six Siege, it is about 3 to 4% faster. And then in Sid Meier's Civ 6, it is up to 15% faster. So this is actually probably the most interesting slide. And then here, they show content creation. So in Puget Bench, it is on par. In Blender, it is 5% faster with a geometric mean. In Geekbench, it is 18% faster than the 7950X3D. In Cinebench 24, it is 21% faster. And in Pavre, it is 30% faster. So this is what I would expect, though. I would be very disappointed with Intel if the content creation did not have these numbers, because the Zen 4 X3D was a CPU that never really used a whole lot of power to begin with. I mean, the 7950 X3D only pulls 120 watts when doing content creation and maxing out the CPU. So I would hope that Intel, with the ability to run up to 250 watts PL2, should be getting higher numbers than a 120 watt AMD from the previous generation. So, I mean, this is good to see, but it's kind of expected. It's like nothing really stands out here. Okay, Arrow Lake performance per watt delivers awesome scaling for efficient gaming. So here what they're showing is when they use PL1 limited to 125 watts, it is on par with what? With what? What is this? I don't understand what this is supposed to, like, this doesn't make any sense. So, relative performance geometric mean of 6 titles at 1080p. It says 6 titles, but here there's 7 titles. And what? Okay, this one actually is lower than that one, so I don't really understand what's going on. This slide probably wasn't needed. Okay, gaming elevated, the complete package for PC enthusiasts. So, okay, all right. Powerhouse creation and AI, balanced AI up to 50% faster creator AI. AI-assisted video editing versus the AMD 9950X. Curious what exactly they're using for this benchmark. Intel's first desktop AI PC with full hardware AI support. That's right, because it's taken from the mobile part, so it has that NPU. With that 36 TOPS. And then up to 8x faster timeline playback of Pro video codecs. So this will be interesting to actually test and see, especially that AI-assisted video thing. I don't know what they're doing with that. Is that Adobe or is that a plugin? I don't really know what that is. So up to 20% faster rendering, ray-traced rendering versus the AMD 9950X. Okay. And then now the chipset. So this is going to be for the motherboards. So the new Intel 800 series chipset. Fantastic I/O for LGA 1851. So here they actually have some notable changes compared to the Z790. One of them is they increased the Gen 5 lane count by 4 lanes. So with Z790, you had a maximum, and this was also true for Z690, you had a maximum of 16 PCIe Gen 5 lanes that connect directly to the CPU. So what that meant was that if you wanted to run a Gen 5 SSD in the Gen 5 drive, that would share lanes. Here we go again. Lane sharing with the GPU. So, what does that mean? Every Z790 motherboard, it doesn't matter who made the motherboard, every Z790 motherboard that offered a Gen 5 M.2 slot shared GPU lanes to achieve that feature. There was no other way around it. That was a platform limitation because there were only 16 Gen 5 lanes. If they wanted to offer a Gen 5 drive slot, they had to share the lanes from the GPU to make that a reality. This time around, Intel increased the Gen 5 lanes from 16 to 20. That means Z890 can offer one Gen 5 SSD without sharing GPU lanes. This is a massive improvement, and this now brings Intel's chipset to parity with AMD's X870E. So basically now, Intel's chipset and AMD's X870E are basically equal in terms of functionality. They both offer USB 4, although Intel's version is called Thunderbolt 4, whereas AMD's is the generic USB 4, that's the open standard one. And then they both offer one Gen 5 SSD with no lane sharing. Any additional Gen 5 SSD except for a few magic motherboards from AMD, which we've talked about in the previous stream, offer lane sharing for additional Gen 5 SSDs. So keep that in mind. So if you're looking for a motherboard that has more than one Gen 5 SSD slot, regardless of whether it's AMD's X870E or Intel's new Z890, both of them will share GPU lanes to offer a second, or in some cases, a third Gen 5 SSD slot. This is a limitation of both chipsets in terms of how the lanes are allocated. So keep that in mind. Otherwise, they're pretty much the same across the board in terms of your PCIe 4.0 lanes, your total usable lanes, and then stuff like Wi-Fi 7 and USB 4, they're basically the same. How come lane sharing has become a thing now? Okay, well, lane sharing was always a thing on Z790 because they didn't have enough lanes. Lane sharing was rarely ever a thing on X670E, where with the previous AMD boards, most of them didn't have any lane sharing. The reason why the new AMD motherboards have lane sharing is because of USB 4. Because of the addition of USB 4, they have to wire 4 of those CPU lanes to the as media controller to offer the dual USB 4. And that way, they can no longer offer a second native Gen 5 SSD. With X670E, they did not require USB 4. So oftentimes what you would see is the motherboard manufacturer would give you 2 Gen 5 slots, and they didn't take any lanes from the GPU because the total lanes on AMD's chipset for Gen 5 was 24 lanes. So what that means is Intel went from 16 lanes now to 20 lanes. AMD went from 24 lanes down to 20 lanes. So now Intel and AMD are literally equal in terms of their Gen 5 lanes. AMD reduced by 4 to bring USB 4 to the motherboards, and Intel increased by 4 so that they no longer had to share. But the thing is, if Intel wants to offer a second or third Gen 5, guess what? You guessed it. The return of the lane sharing. So lane sharing is not going to go away. It is here to stay, unfortunately, for a lot of these boards. There are going to be a few notable exceptions. For example, we talked about ASRock's motherboards on AMD. None of the ASRock X870E boards share GPU lanes. The MSI Godlike also does not share GPU lanes. And the Tomahawk from MSI also doesn't share GPU lanes. So there are some ways around it. And I bet there will also be Intel motherboards that do not share GPU lanes, especially now since they increased the lane count to 20. 16 was a huge problem for Intel with the previous generation. It basically made it impossible to use that top M.2 slot without taking lanes from the graphics card for every Z790 motherboard. So this is a massive improvement, which means Z890 is finally on par with AMD's chipset. Okay, uncompromised platform connectivity. So now they're basically showing all this stuff. So integrated will have Thunderbolt 4. I expect that will be, most of the motherboards will offer Thunderbolt 4 because that is standard. If they want to offer Thunderbolt 5, so I don't know what the current status on Thunderbolt 5 is, especially for desktop. This will require a discrete chip. So what that means is if ASUS, MSI, Gigabyte, ASRock, if they want to offer Thunderbolt 5 on one of these Z890 motherboards, they will have to take, you guessed it, 4 lanes of PCI Express, which means, here's the thing, the motherboards that offer Thunderbolt 5, assuming there will be motherboards that offer Thunderbolt 5, will in fact have the dreaded lane sharing with the GPU, because this requires a discrete chip. This is not integrated into the Arrow Lake CPU. So keep that in mind. Again, the dreaded lane sharing will occur if the motherboard supports Thunderbolt 5. Now, that doesn't mean that a Thunderbolt 4 motherboard can't do lane sharing. Like I said, if they want 2 or 3 Gen 5 SSDs as an offering to do product segmentation, then guess what? Lane sharing. That's the answer. So natively, the Intel CPU supports Wi-Fi 6E. If they are to offer Wi-Fi 7, that will require additional use of PCIe lanes to pull that off. So that is actually no different from AMD's motherboards. So I expect pretty much all of the new motherboards to offer Wi-Fi 7. I expect Thunderbolt 4 and Wi-Fi 7. I do not expect Thunderbolt 5, nor do I expect Wi-Fi 6E unless they're going with these, like, you know, budget cost reduced, like lower end $200 whatever motherboards. Those might have Wi-Fi 6E, but I expect most of them to be Wi-Fi 7 and Thunderbolt 4. And then for Bluetooth, you know, it's whatever. And then Ethernet, it's either going to be 1.1 gigabit or 2.5 gigabit is what they're offering. Now, that doesn't mean that a motherboard cannot include 10 gigabit LAN, but keep in mind, if the manufacturer opts for 10 gigabit LAN, they have to take PCIe lanes to pull that off. So it's not a big deal. It just means that if they're going to do 10 gig, they're going to take 2 lanes, whereas if they're doing 1 or 2.5 or 5, they only need 1 lane. Room to max out memory. So again, here we go again, up to 6400. Anything above 6400 is considered not supported. Up to 48 gigabyte per DIMM. So that means up to a maximum of 192 gigabytes maximum capacity. ECC support, dual channel, and then they've got UDIMM, QDIMM, SODIMM, CSODIMM. So all the different memory types except for RDIMM, because that's for servers, and Threadripper. You won't see that on here, but you will see your typical UDIMM, your typical DDR5, 6000, 6400, your JEDEC stuff, that's like 52, 5600. That's going to be UDIMM. And then CUDIMM or QDIMM. We talked about this last week when we were talking about AMD's motherboards. So the MSI AMD boards already have the QDIMM support. The others should get it with a BIOS update. So it looks like QDIMM will also be supported on the Intel motherboards. So that's nice to see. All those advertised speeds that you see that are like 9,000 plus, 10,000, whatever, those are going to be QDIMM. Those are going to be QDIMM. Those are the newest memory type, which we should see either at the very end of this year, meaning December, at the earliest. Otherwise, you're not going to see QDIMM until next year. But that is going to be the insanely fast 9,000 or like 8,000 plus, where it's like 8,000, but it's higher density and it's much easier to pull off. So, that's going to be QDIMM. That's the future. Just know that that's probably going to be very expensive when it first comes out, because when DDR5 launched 3 years ago, it was insanely expensive. So I expect QDIMM to be expensive when it comes out relative to regular UDIMM. Overclocking overhauled. So here, this is actually quite interesting. They're doing some new stuff here. Number one, the granular core clock. They're doing what AMD did on Zen 5 for more incremental megahertz changes if you're adjusting the frequency in the BIOS. And the step up, step down speeds from, like, for example, like power level 0, which is like full throttle, versus power level 1 versus power level 2. Now they can step up or down in 16.67 megahertz increments. So the other thing that's new which is nice to see because this is something that AMD introduced 2 years ago with Zen 4, is the dual base clock, or the asynchronous mode. Asynchronous mode was something that you could only do on certain AMD X670E motherboards, and more recently now it's on some of the flagship X870E boards. So this is something that's new to see on the Intel platform. That's actually pretty interesting to bring back B clock support. Tile to tile fabric OC. So here's another thing that's new about the new Intel CPU. So because this is a chiplet design, similar to AMD, it has a fabric. Just like how, if you guys are familiar with AMD's terminology, they have the Infinity fabric, or also known as the F clock, if we're talking about overclocking the different parts in the system. So the fabric lives in the I/O die on the Ryzen CPU. Here they have the fabric tile, which according to this, it sounds like it'll have its own clock speed, which is exposed to the user in the BIOS. So just like with the F clock on AMD, it looks like you'll be able to overclock the fabric on the Intel CPU now as well. You're going to buy tons of RGB. Someone was asking, I saw the question, do you think the Aorus Xtreme X670E Xtreme is still a B? Well, it's no longer manufactured. It was the best motherboard that ASUS had for the previous generation, but it was just extremely expensive at $1,000. But it did offer everything that someone would need, typically. DLVR bypass, we'll talk about this later after launch. This could be an interesting way to do extreme overclocks. Basically, this can allow you to bypass the internal voltage management system to basically overvolt the CPU. Now, considering Intel's recent history with voltages on their CPUs, I don't know how many people would opt to use this feature. Unless you're on extreme cooling. And when I say extreme cooling, I'm not talking about a custom loop. That's not extreme cooling. I'm talking about dry ice or a chiller or LN2. Intel Extreme tuning, so that's okay. Memory overclocking, that's nothing new, except now they've got support for QDIM in there. P and E core overclocking, P core per core. Okay, this is interesting. So now the E cores can be overclocked using their own voltage frequency curve, kind of like on the Ryzen 9, where you have your two CCDs. You have CCD 0 and you have CCD 1. Typically on Ryzen, CCD 0 clocks higher than CCD 1. So it's almost like Intel now has the two voltage frequency curves. So the P cores are kind of like AMD's CCD 0, and the E cores are like the CCD 1. However, they also have per cluster E-core voltage frequency control. That's kind of like per CCD on AMD's curve optimizer. So to me, this looks like somebody at Intel basically took some AMD CPUs and played around with them in the BIOS to figure out, oh, you know, like how do we build more like automated overclocking functionality into the CPU so that it can overclock itself using the voltage frequency curve, and that's essentially what curve optimizer is. Low temperature overvolting, increasingly bypass voltage limits as the chip gets colder. Okay, that's only really going to matter for extreme cooling. You need a new motherboard. You need a new motherboard next Intel? Okay. Yeah. What Super Googly was saying is 9800 X3D coming out early. I don't know. Honestly, I don't know. That's a great question. There are rumors that it's coming out. I don't know how true those rumors are. I would say at the earliest, probably sometime in the middle of next month to the end of next month. At the earliest, if I had to guess. So, okay. I mean, that's what I would assume for 9800X3D. So, yeah, definitely, most people I think are going to want to wait to see how that plays out, because that CPU is probably going to be the fastest gaming CPU. Because this one's definitely not the fastest gaming CPU. I mean, Intel's setting expectations accordingly with this. This is more of an efficiency play. I said this like months ago when we were talking about the Zen 5 launch. I said on stream, and I'm going to say it again, I said that AMD's Zen 5 is an efficiency play. Like, it's basically AMD trying to recalibrate the trajectory on where they're going to go with their CPU design for the next several generations. And that's basically what Zen 5 is. You know, they widened the pipe, they changed the branch predictor, they put like full fat AVX 512 in there. So, and I don't know how useful that will be for consumers, unless game developers start coding their games for AVX 512, which I don't see that happening. But really, I think what it is for data center. I think it's a way for AMD to get into the embedded market with AVX 512 as a feature set in their AM5 EPYC-based CPUs. But you can also go with the AMD Ryzen CPUs. So I think that's kind of where that's coming from, but I'm not 100% sure on that. Retailers already have info on the 9800X3D launching end of October. Wait, really? Retailers have that? A friend of mine works at the store, and they were expected to receive that. Okay, that's really interesting. Okay, I would assume for 9800X3D, if that's true, I would expect it to launch a month from now, probably in the middle of November, or maybe the end of November, somewhere around there. If that is true. Okay, so, all right, so the Intel Platform Advantage, the latest connectivity for enthusiasts, Wi-Fi 6E and Thunderbolt 4, aka USB 4, integrated. And optional Wi-Fi 7 and Thunderbolt 5 via discrete add-on solutions. Enhanced overclocking, more control and tuning, up to 192 gigabytes of max memory capacity. And there we go. Here is the ecosystem partners. So they're listing Acer, ASUS, Dell. These are basically the pre-built or who you're going to be able to buy the parts from. So Acer, ASUS, Dell, Alienware, Gigabyte. Dell and Alienware are the same company. Gigabyte, HP, CyberPower, MSI, Newegg, Origin, Digital Storm, Corsair, Best Buy, Microsoft, Third Wave, Main Gear, Scan, Puget Systems, JD.com. That's over in Asia. And then Lenovo, Amazon, ASRock, Shedax, Falcon Northwest, NZXT, Micron, Samsung, SK Hynix. I don't really know why. What? iBuyPower, Colorful. Oh, because of the the laptops. Yeah. Maxsun. Okay, so that's pretty much it. That's the whole presentation. It goes back to the beginning after that. But yeah, that's it. So that is Intel. That is the entire deep dive discussion, or I guess overview, I should say, on an analysis of the upcoming Intel Core Ultra 200S series. If 5080 is 16 gigabytes, you would get 16 gigabytes for 5070. I don't know. I think this is probably gonna be 12, guys. I don't know. It depends on what it is, though. It depends on what the chip is. So we don't really know. But anyway, that's that. There's no BioStar? No, apparently not. I don't know. BioStar has the AMD board. I don't know. NZXT's list. This is probably going to be an NZXT motherboard. So that's it. I mean, they kind of. I feel like they're trying to be very upfront about like what it is. I think this slide here, kind of got to me. I did not like seeing how the Core Ultra doesn't have turbo boost, and the Core Ultra 7 or Core Ultra 5 has no turbo boost, and Core Ultra 7 has no thermal velocity boost. That is really disappointing. That is an example of upsell right there. That is like a forced upsell. And then when they showed, like, I think this one is probably the one that's going to get to people. There's two slides. This one and this one. So Battle of the Titans. Battle of the Titans is a really interesting slide for the gaming because this shows that it's on par with AMD's 9950X in gaming. And then against Intel's 14900K, it is also on par in terms of gaming. So there are some wins and there are some losses, and across the board it's pretty much the same. So I don't know, guys. Who do you think? What's weird is they only really showed the Ultra 9. They didn't show the Ultra 7. Historically, the Ultra 7 is the most, it's like the best value from Intel, kind of like how the i7 was always like the best choice for most people. But they didn't really talk about it. It's disappointing that it does not have thermal velocity boost, which means that the Ultra 7 isn't going to be able to hit the boost clocks, at least out of the box, which means if you buy an Ultra 7, you do have to manually overclock it if you want it to get the same boost clocks as a 14700K. That is kind of interesting to point that out. But the thing is, because these CPUs, both AMD and Intel, because these CPUs are efficiency play, like they're both focused on energy efficiency this time around, they're more fun to overclock because they have more margin. They have more left in the tank to get better tweaked performance. So you can tweak them for better single thread, or you can tweak them for better multi-thread, or you can try to get a best of both worlds, you know, like with a general PBO overclock, for example. So it's interesting to see, but I mean, that's kind of where we're at with these. So we're moving away from like Intel and AMD giving you like all the performance up front, like right out of the box. Like they're basically maxed out. Like especially the Intel, there was like literally it's already outside of the efficiency curve, and they had to do that to be competitive with Zen 4. And then Zen 4 also like targeting 95 degrees C as a temperature target for performance. Like both of them, the way I look at it, it was like Ryzen 7950X was Goku bursting into Super Saiyan 2, and the 13900K was Vegeta going Super Saiyan 2 in like the Majin Buu saga. And then when Vegeta went and gave his soul away to Babidi and became Majin Vegeta, that is basically the 13900K transforming into the 14900KS. That's essentially how I see it. In my mind, I see a 7950X as Goku going Super Saiyan 2. It helps that it's orange, right? Like Goku's clothing. Speaking of the new Dragon Ball Z game that just came out. And then Vegeta wearing his blue jumpsuit, aka Intel. That's the way I see it. And then Intel powering up so much, like insane Majin Vegeta electric power. That is basically Intel 14900K. See, I broke it down for you guys. 14900K equals Majin Vegeta. Zen 4 7950X equals Goku Super Saiyan 2. Which CPU is Super Saiyan God? See, okay, guys. Super Saiyan God is basically like Threadripper or Epic. It's like a completely okay. Actually, now I think about Epic, Epic in server would be like Super Saiyan God because it's like 192 cores. You know what I'm saying? So, Threadripper or Epic would be like Super Saiyan God. Yeah, SS God is Epic. Yeah, you got it. That's the best analogy, man. Like I literally made that analogy like on the spot. 13900K is Vegeta, 14900K is Majin Vegeta, and then you've got like 7950X is like Goku Super Saiyan 2 or whatever. And then like I guess the 9950X is like Goku when he goes to Dead World and he like has the angel halo, you know, and his body's more robust. That's 9950X. Speaking of Dragon Ball Z, there's like a new DBZ game that came out. I think it came out today, or it comes out in a few hours, right? Like, what is that game called? I forgot the name of it. The new Tenkaichi game, which is 7800XV. Oh, 7800XV is Gohan. 7800XV is Gohan, man. That's Gohan. Gohan's X3D, guys. Gohan's got that extra cache, you know, like on top, like his brain, his IQ level or whatever. Yeah, Gohan's definitely X3D. 100%. He has so much potential. He has so much potential. X3D shows its efficiency and its potential in gaming. Yeah. I mean, every now and then I'll make these weird analogies that just kind of stand out. It's like that could become like a Pogger clip from like a live stream because it's just so off the top, you know, like out of nowhere. We've done this on multiple streams before. Like, if you guys are new to the channel, get subscribed. We do this sort of discussion every Thursdays. This is Tech Thursdays for those that are new. Imagine 1400KS undervolted with negative 200 reduction. It would both give better performance in tons of them. Not necessarily. It could also be unstable. Walmart has, because again, you know, that's Silicon Lottery when you do undervolting. Yeah, because 7800X3. So guys, here's what happened. A lot of people don't know this, but three to 4 months ago, AMD stopped producing Zen 4. Like, early in the summer, AMD stopped manufacturing Zen 4 because there's no reason to. They already bought all the wafers to manufacture Zen 5. So it's like, obviously, like, why are they still gonna make Zen 4 if they literally just launched Zen 5? So what happened was most of the people who saw like the people who saw the Zen 5 gaming benchmarks, which were in a vacuum, like if you compare Zen 5's gaming benchmarks, they were pretty good. But because Zen 5 couldn't defeat the X3D, like they couldn't beat themselves, AMD lost to themselves in gaming. What do you think is going to happen? People are going to buy the X3D. So people just started buying up X3D. They just kept buying X3D. All the big YouTube channels kept recommending X3D. Oh, X3D, it's so good. Oh, it's the best thing ever. Oh, forget about Goku. Gohan's way better than Goku, man. Forget about Goku. Gohan. That's X3D. So people start buying up X3D. And as a result, what ends up happening? I mean, AMD wasn't building Zen 4 anymore because they switched over to Zen 5 production. So what do you think's going to happen? People are just they're going to sell out of Zen 4, and X3D, especially the 7800 X3D was the most popular one. So obviously there was a run on the market and everybody in the summer was buying up the X3D, and fast forward, now we're in the fall. Now we're here we are in Q4, and now it's sold out everywhere. You know, so there's your answer. Like AMD was their worst own enemy because, you know, like, I don't know, Gohan trained with the Z sword and became Mystic Gohan, you know, like now he doesn't even need the Super Saiyan. He's X3D. I mean, he's better, you know, who cares? So that's basically what happened. So now people are just sitting around because they can't buy that X3D. Now, they could go and buy a 7950 X3D, but since the rumors of the Zen 5 X3D are now starting to show up more and more, people are just going to wait around now. So, yeah, that's basically what happened. So, Mystic 3D. I know, right? That Mystic 3D is the 9800 X3D. So the Battle of the Titans, you know, I read this as, oh, this is basically Goku versus like Vegeta all over again, or whatever. So that's basically what this is. So anyway, I mean, there you go. Like, that's it. That's probably the main slide that most people have shared all over the internet now. It's like, oh, 264 on the 14900 versus 261 on the new Intel Ultra 9. But, you know, the new one is using less, 80 watts total system power less. So, I mean, that's good. That's good. I mean, it's an efficiency play. So, you think the CPU will sell as bad as 9000 series at launch? Let's wait and see if people really care about efficiency. Well, I mean, Zen 5 was more efficient than Zen 4. The 9950X doesn't pull more than 200 watts max. I mean, I know the numbers because I literally tested all the CPUs. So the 9950X tops out at 200 watts on the out-of-box standard power consumption. And then that's without using PBO. That's just stock. And the 7950X pulls 230 watts stock. So that's 30 watts less. And that's not total system power. That's CPU only power. Maximum. So like when you run Cinebench, you start looping Cinebench R23, the 7950X will pull 230 watts. The 9950X will only pull 199/200 watts max. So that's a 30 watt reduction of the CPU power, not total power. That's CPU power. So I mean, guys, there's a reason why all of Intel's slides, whenever Intel focuses on energy efficiency, they're always comparing it to Raptor Lake. There's a reason why. Even on the slides where they show, like right here, see, like they're pointing out, you know, total system power is down 58 watts. Total system power is down 34 watts, 165 watts, 136 watts in these extreme cases. They don't show that when they're comparing it against AMD. And there's a reason why they're not showing it compared to AMD, right? Because the thing is, if they're showing this is the total, we can kind of figure out what the numbers would look like compared to AMD. I expect the Intel CPU is going to be close to the Zen 5 CPU. Or it's probably going to be somewhere between like Zen 5, Zen 4, somewhere in there. Maybe it's going to be closer to Zen 4 in power consumption. Maybe it's going to be closer to Zen 5 in power consumption. And when I'm talking about Zen 5 and Zen 4, I'm not talking about X3D, because X3D uses even less power. You know, like the 7800 X3D, that thing uses like 40 watts. It's like 40 watts in gaming. So it's like, I mean, because I have that CPU. I know exactly how it behaves while gaming. So, and that's stock. That's stock. It uses anywhere from like 40, the maximum is like 60 watts. In the most like CPU unoptimized messes of games, it'll get up to like 60 watts. But that's the worst that you'll see while gaming with a 7800X3D. Otherwise, it's like 40, 45. I mean, you could throw that thing on a laptop. So, PUBG 602. What does PUBG 602 mean? Oh, 60? 60 watts in PUBG on the 7800X3D. Yeah, see, like that's worst case scenario. Yeah. Yeah, so those things, man, though, like, notice that they try not to mention X3D in, like, they did show one X3D comparison. This one right here. They showed a few. Notice that it was a reduced list. They didn't show like this huge list like they showed here. They showed a condensed version of like 5 games where, they showed Cyberpunk 2077 where it is 21% slower than the 7950X3D in Cyberpunk 2077. And then, best case scenario, they're showing 15% faster in Civ 6. So it's like, take your pick. Are you someone who likes games like Cyberpunk 2077? Or are you someone who likes strategy games like Civ 6? So, I mean, that's kind of what this shows. But they never mention the power. When they talk about this, they're very specific. They do not show, they don't talk about the power consumption in this scenario. $7,800X3D at most pulls around 80 watts in games. Yeah, but see, that's if you start messing with PBO. Like if you change the limits on the motherboard, like if you go into PBO and you turn it on and you set like motherboard power limit, then you're going to see it use more. I'm talking about stock. So this is interesting. Like the content creation, yeah, it better win in content creation. If Intel can't win against the 750X3D in content creation, that's going to be really embarrassing. Considering those E-cores had a 32% IPC uplift. So it better win in this. It's more on par with the regular Zen 5. I think, did they show content creation like against, yeah, so wait, what is this? No, this isn't even content creation. This is like synthetics. So yeah, we'll have to wait for the reviewers to see like we'll have to wait for actual third-party reviews to actually get the full picture. But I do think Intel is mostly being honest with their results. Like I don't think they're like hiding anything specific. I think they're kind of just showing it as it is. Golden Joystick nominated Dragon's Dogma 2 as one of the nominees. Wukong and Stellar Blade are not even on the nominee list. Well, Dragon's Dogma 2, I can understand why that game should be on the list. That game was very good. You have to wait 6 months on PC. Wait, what are we talking about? From PS5? The saving grace for the CPU can be the P-cores overclocking with sustained higher speeds. But see, you're assuming that can be done. See, the problem with that assumption, what we don't know... Here's the thing, guys. There is a reason why this CPU has a clock speed reduction. And it has to deal with the node that it's using. So, because of the node that they went with, it cannot clock that high. So... I'm hoping that this can hit, on the P-core, I'm hoping this can hit like 5.8 to 5.9 on a standard, like with a standard overclock. Because with the Zen 5, with the 9950X, I can overclock this to 5.9 gigahertz. So I would hope that with the Intel CPU, it's possible to get a similar overclock on the Ultra 9. But we have no idea because it's a different node. This is not manufactured by Intel. So keep in mind, these new CPUs are not made by Intel. These are going to be manufactured by TSMC. And I think the node, if I'm not mistaken, is is what, N3B or N4B or something. It's one of those other nodes that Apple moved away from ASAP. So it is definitely a mobile part in terms of what it was designed for and the sort of node that it was using or that it is using. So because of that, I'm not too optimistic in terms of like how high you can overclock it, but possibly like one P core might be able to hit 5.8, 5.9 if we're lucky. So who knows? Somewhere around there is what I think the maximum will be for a normal person trying to overclock. Now, obviously, as soon as you put this thing under LN2 and extreme cool, you go sub-zero temperature, that changes everything. But that is not a normal overclock, and that is not a normal everyday use case. That is more of like an academic thing. Oh, look what it can do, you know, like when it's running at negative 50 degrees Celsius. You know, that's cool. I mean, okay, it's not very practical, but it can do that, okay. Agreed, but I think the clocks rarely hit the 5.5 stock, so with high-end cooling, you can maintain like that with one core. With one or two, so the thing is, 1 or 2 cores can hit the 5.7. You cannot do 5.7 on all of these cores, on these P cores. If Intel does not have any more degrading issues, it's all because of TSMC. TSMC is responsible for all the efficiency gains. I don't know. I mean, okay, obviously, yes, because of TSMC's node, this processor is massively more efficient than the previous one. I don't know if that's 100% because of TSMC, though. You would have to think that it has to also be due to the fact that Intel prioritized energy efficiency with this design. So with this architecture. So I don't know if TSMC takes all the credit for the efficiency gains. Because, like, we read this at the beginning, right here. The program goals, the number one goal of this CPU was reduce the package power by 40%. This is a design goal for Intel's team, not TSMC. So yes, choosing the node, that is a big decision when it comes to, how do we achieve the 40% power reduction? Like, we got to pick a node that's going to be able to allow us to achieve this. But they also have to design the part to also fulfill that goal or facilitate that goal. So I don't know if it's all TSMC. I don't think that's fair to Intel, because I think Intel, that was one of their design goals when they set out to build this thing from the start. And they wanted to maintain the gaming performance. They are not trying to improve the gaming performance with this part. They're trying to reduce power and maintain the gaming performance. That is the goal. So it is nice of Intel to show the actual goals, to show the public the actual objectives. This way, if somebody goes and wastes a whole bunch of money on a new Ultra 9 and a brand new motherboard, and they buy DDR5, assuming they were on DDR4 with a 14900K, they're probably they're disappointed. Like, why is this thing the same performance? Like, what? I just wasted like $1,200, like maybe $1,500. You know, like I just spent $1,500 and I was on a 14900KS. I went from 14900KS, which I bought in like June of this year. Now I'm spending like all this money on a new motherboard, DDR5, because I didn't have DDR5. I had DDR4 on the 14 gen. It's like I just spent like $1,500 to upgrade from a 14900KS to this. Why is the gaming performance worse? Why is the gaming performance worse? I don't understand. What's going on? What happened? What's going on? Hey, what? That's the sort of reaction that people will get. But if they complain to Intel, Intel will just be like, no. Read the slide. Read the slide. It says performance per watt while maintaining gaming performance. We are maintaining gaming performance. We are not improving gaming performance. Wrong expectation. So you just spent $1,500. Thank you. That helps our ecosystem, but you're getting the same gaming performance. So that's basically level setting with the public. So I think it's very good on Intel's part to do this because they're setting the correct expectation so people cannot go and try to like say, hey, what, this is a scam. No, it's because they didn't educate themselves on the product before upgrading. That being said, I don't think anybody on a 14900KS should consider upgrading to Arrow Lake. I don't think that is a good use of that money. Even if it's like 40% less power. There's a bunch of trade-offs. You're losing 8 threads. You're potentially losing gaming performance in a lot of cases. So that's marketing speak. In the real world, they have to buy fab production way ahead of time, like years. They had to buy what was available 2 years ago. Was N3B available 2 years ago? You'll see that GTA 5 will run on PS5 the same as GTA 5 ran on PS3. Or GTA 6 will run on PS5. TSMC does the 4000 series NVIDIA GPUs. And now Intel CPUs. TSMC has proven themselves on efficiency. Quick sell the motherboard before the CPU comes out. Wait, what? Quick sell the motherboard? Sell what motherboard? Oh, the what? The Intel board? Oh, you mean the old one? The Z, the one that can't, the one that shares lanes? Every Z790 motherboard shares lanes. Every single Z790 motherboard that offers a Gen 5 SSD slot shares lanes with the GPU. 100% guaranteed. What? You just tried turning off the SMT. It ran poorly. Yeah, because it's designed to use the SMT. I mean, no, it'll still run. You'll still get probably slightly better single thread, but it's like, okay, now it's literally like a processor from 5 years ago. You will have PS5 Pro 2 days before release. Really? Wait, what? How? One perk of the Arrow Lake is the Thunderbolt 4 is completely native, so PCIe lanes needs to be yeah. That's why ASRock's cheapest boards have it. Yes. Well, keep in mind, Thunderbolt 4 is not really new anymore. Thunderbolt 4, basically, by offering Thunderbolt 4, they have parity with the AMD boards offering USB 4. But you are correct. Because it is native, they do not have to take lanes from the chipset or from the CPU. It's actually hardwired to 4 of the lanes on the CPU. Oh, you'll be able to sell PS5 Pro? Oh, okay. Yeah, PS5 Pro. I will be covering that, guys. I will be covering PS5 Pro. I'm going to go back and do a lot of comparisons with the PS5 in terms of like how games that were hard to run on PS5, how they run on PS5 Pro. PS5 Pro is going to be pretty awesome at release. Yeah, there was another thing that was announced today. So the other thing was Turin. So Turin launched today as well. So this is more like for the data center. So EPYC Turin We were talking about like Goku, like Super Saiyan God mode. So basically, that's what this is. Up to, there we go again, up to 37% IPC increase, up to 192 cores. So that is a lot of cores. And the thing with the AMD CPUs, these are all the P cores. So every single one of these has SMT, which means a single 192 core EPYC is a 384 thread CPU. And that is single socket. Most servers are dual socket, which means you can run 2 of these in a single server. So that is a lot of cores. You know, we're talking up to 768 threads on a single server with dual EPYC CPUs. 500 watt TDP, 5 gigahertz clock, significantly outperforming Xeon. Well, okay, I would bet with that many threads, with potentially 768 threads, it's probably going to be significantly outperforming Xeon. So this was announced today. So while Intel was announcing Arrow Lake on desktop, AMD was announcing EPYC Turin. So Turin is basically Zen 5 on in server. Yeah, so they show here, they started in 2018 with the first generation of EPYC that was known as the Naples. Then they had the second generation, which was, what was the second one? Oh, no, I take that back. Oh, yes, that's correct. Naples was first gen, Rome was second gen, then third gen was Milan. Don't ask me why it's a bunch of Italian cities. I have no idea why they went with all these Italian places. And then fourth gen was Genoa. So it's another Italian place. And so, yeah, I don't know what's up with all the Italians. AMD representing Italians, man. Just straight up represent Italians everywhere. EPYC CPUs are named after Italian cities. Like, that's pretty cool. And then the fifth gen is Turin. So, yeah, I mean, look at the, wow. So from Zen 3 to Zen 4, that was a massive change. And part of that probably is because of DDR5 bandwidth. Yeah, you're talking like 12 channels of DDR5. 12 memory channels. You know how many memory channels we get on desktop? We get 2. We get 2 memory channels. You get channel A and you get channel B. Well, EPYC has 12 memory channels. So we're talking about RAM in the terabytes. We're talking about terabytes of memory. So people saying, oh, 32 gigs of memory, my PC has 32 gigs of memory. 32 gigs of memory is like the minimum for a gaming PC today. Dude, it's not about latency. It's about throughput. We're talking about a server. We're not talking about like a gaming PC. This is a completely different market, completely different objectives and design goals. This thing needs to be 100 or maybe even 1000% stable. It has to be so stable that there can be a lightning storm. There can be literally a hurricane with tornadoes outside the data center, and this thing is still humming away, hosting the Final Fantasy XIV Ether data centers so that I can be logging in and doing my weekly raid in Final Fantasy XIV. This thing is going to have 100% 24/7 uptime hosting those game servers with rock solid stability. That is what it's all about. You need to play games with a dual EPYC processor. I mean, you could game on it. I don't know, like, why you would. It would literally, like, the CPU utilization would be less than 1%. CPU utilization would be at less than 1%. You know, with like 4 terabytes of memory, you're probably like your RAM usage is like what, like less than 1% also. And you know what goes in here? You know the sort of GPUs that go in here? RTX 4090 Ti. This thing is paired up with the 4090 Ti. Like 4090 Ti, guys. Like for real. Where's that 4090 Ti? Check it out. There it is. 4090 Ti. This thing, you put like 8 of these. 8 4090 Tis are paired up with the dual EPYC server. You put 8 4090 Tis. This is the 4090 Ti. You can see right here. It is the fastest GPU. It is faster. One of these is faster than a 4090. You put 8 of these in the EPYC server. You got 8 of these. No, we're not talking about one 4090 Ti. We're talking about 8 4090 Tis. So you got dual EPYC. You got that's 768 threads or 384 cores and 8 4090 Tis. Each one of these GPUs has 48 gigabytes of VRAM. 48 gigabytes of VRAM. So in a virtual memory pool, that's 384 gigabytes of VRAM. So you got 4 terabytes of RAM, you got 768 compute threads on the EPYC CPUs, and you have 384 gigs of VRAM across 8 4090 Ti's. That is a true gaming server. $32K gaming PC. I mean, with that much compute, it'd be interesting to see like academically, like what sort of frame rates you could push, assuming you could run like NVLink across all those GPUs and get linear scaling in a best case scenario. You know, with a game that actually scales with SLI, so that would be something like Shadow of the Tomb Raider. So you could play like Shadow of the Tomb Raider at like 16K or 32K or something, everything maxed out with something like this. So yeah. I mean, that's basically Super Saiyan God. We were talking about Super Saiyan God earlier and drawing analogies. Yeah, this is basically Super Saiyan God. So anyway, I mean, that's pretty much it, guys. Like, that was the discussion. AMD did this. I know this is less relevant to my audience, but I mean, it's a thing. You know, like they're like, hey, look what we can do. You're like, who cares about Super Saiyan 3? You know, that's like whatever. Yeah, I guess for next week, I will be covering, at some point we'll be covering the Intel motherboards. Now, the thing with the new Intel boards, there's going to be a lot of Intel boards because this is a brand new socket. So there's going to be a lot of like mid-range, and I don't know about entry-level. There's not going to be that many entry-level. There's going to be a lot of mid-range. There's going to be a lot of like $300 to $500 motherboards for Z890. And there's going to be a bunch of like flagships too. So eight terabyte SSD. No, it'd be way more than 8 terabytes. 8 terabytes is like one SSD. Storage on something like that would be like hundreds of terabytes. Hundreds of terabytes. Like one enterprise SSD would be like 14 to 16 terabytes just for like one. So, how much more FPS in 4K would you get with the... honestly, with just one GPU, it's not going to be that much. I mean, you can see it right here. See? It's like the 4090 is 91% of an Ada 6000. So you do the inverse of that, you get the percentage. But this is the fully enabled die. Like, this is the full 100% enabled 8102. 18,176 cores. Or CUDA cores. Or SMs, whatever you want to call it. But that's the 4090 Ti. Has the X870E rating changed? For which board? Not really. I would say that the ratings still stand overall. There was a couple of changes. If you watched the live stream that I did last weekend, there were two boards that actually got moved. One of them, the ProArt, got moved down, and I forget which one got moved up. One of them went up, one of them went down. I know the ProArt was the one that went down, but I forget which one went up a tier. But yeah, overall, like, I would say the tier list still pretty much stands as is. I think, I mean, I'm just thinking in my head, like, what each of those boards offers at the price point that they're being sold at. So it's like, yeah, no, I think it pretty much stands as is. It's pretty accurate. The Strix E-E is probably S tier. Instead of A. That would be the one that goes up, and then the ProArt goes down to B. For the reasons mentioned in the live stream. So basically, all the other boards stayed as is. The ASUS boards one went up and one went down. Because originally I had both of them. I had the Strix and the ProArt both at A, but the Strix is actually the better choice. And it's actually a really good choice. So it went up to S, and then the ProArt went down because the ProArt is almost $500 and it has no postcode, and you can't actually use the X8 slot because it's too close to the primary slot. So as soon as you plug a 4090 in there, it's going to cover up the second slot, so you can't use it. So I mean, there's things about it that were like, okay, it has 10 gig, but it's almost $500. It doesn't have a postcode. You can't actually use the X8 slot if we're being practical. So there was just too many weird things about the ProArt, which is what I didn't like about it. So it went down to B. And then the Strix went up a tier because it has asynchronous eCLK. It has better heat sinks than the Hero. Like, the Strix E-E has very good M.2 heat sinks. It has 3 really chunky heat sinks for the Gen 5. So yes, it has lane sharing, but you know, it's like you don't have to use the Gen 5 slots. You can still use one of them, and there's no sharing, and you can still use the 2 Gen 4 slots at the bottom. So you can still do 3 M.2s on the Strix before you have to share lanes with the GPU, and it has the X4 slot. So yeah, the Strix is definitely like an S tier board. Does the Nova have synchronous eCLK? I don't know. That's a very good question. I wish I knew the answer to that, but I don't know. I don't know if it does. I would assume that the eCLK is only on the Tai Chi. In fact, it might not even be on the Tai Chi Lite. It might just only be on the Tai Chi. But yeah, that's something that I don't actually know for a fact on the Nova. I assume the Tai Chi has it because all the, we'll call it $500 motherboards. Typically, all the $500 motherboards have the eCLK, and anything above that should also have the eCLK. But anything less than $500, then it's kind of like, I don't expect it to have that. Yeah, the Tai Chi has something. Someone figured it out on the stream by looking at the manual. Something was referenced in the Tai Chi manual that mentioned it, and it wasn't in the Nova manual. So it's probably on Tai Chi as an exclusive to justify that higher price. Again, you know, market segmentation, going back to Intel with the thermal, where is it? The thermal velocity thing only being offered on the market segmentation. It's like, okay, Which motherboard has eCLK? Okay, the most expensive ones do. Okay, that's cool. Which one of these Intel CPUs has thermal velocity boost? Oh, only the Ultra 9 does. You don't get that on the 7. That's market segmentation. What it allows you to do, Chicken, is it allows you to decouple the CPU base clock from the rest of the system. So you can do, like, for example, you can do a e-clock of, say, 102 or 103 instead of 100. So when you do the math, maybe that will be the paint session for this stream, and then we'll probably end the stream. So yeah, so let's go over that real quick. So eCLK stands for external clock. So this is a crystal oscillator reference that exists on the physical motherboard. Notice how it says external. External means outside the CPU. If it was internal, if it was, like, for example, eCLK or internal clock, this means that it is physically inside the CPU. It's under the IHS inside the CPU, either in the I/O die or in one of the compute dies of the Ryzen CPU. Probably the I/O die. And it does have an internal clock. All CPUs have an internal crystal oscillator that runs at I believe it is 48 megahertz is the internal reference clock, which then, this is the crystal oscillator, which provides the timing for the cores, for the PCIe lanes, for the SATA drives. Basically, everything in the computer will synchronize back to this internal clock. Now, there will be different components that provide the timing. So, for example, you may have something for the CPU, you might have something for the RAM, you have something for the PCIe. So we'll just use those as an example. Now, what this is something called a PLL, or a phase lock loop. So we have the CPU PLL, we have the DRAM PLL, or the memory. Well, we can probably just say like UMC, or the Unified Memory Controller PLL, and then we have the PCIe typically would be on its own PLL. And the PCIe, this one further, this will go to the PCIe slots, obviously, so that's going to affect your graphics card. That's going to affect the NVMe drive, so any M.2 drives. The SATA drives are typically off of here. And then there's probably a fourth one that I'm missing for USB. So that would be like a one for the USB, but we'll just kind of ignore that one for now. And then you have the cores, and then you have the memory. So these phase lock loops are all in sync. So I like to think of them as these spinning, like they're like these spinners that are just going again and again and again, just infinitely spinning around, because they're all timing references for these various components, but they all derive their synchronization from the internal 48 megahertz oscillator inside the CPU. Now, that brings us to the topic of the external eCLK, or the external clock. This is a clock that exists outside the CPU. This is on the motherboard. So the only way you would have access to this feature is if the motherboard actually includes its own clock generator on the motherboard. So for example, let's use white here. The X870E Crosshair Hero includes this. In fact, I currently use it on mine. The X870E-E Strix also has this feature. Supposedly, the X870 Aorus Xtreme AI top from Gigabyte. This is the upcoming flagship, which was recently announced yesterday, I believe. Gigabyte announced this. So now we have all the details on the upcoming Xtreme AI top. That should have it as well. And then maybe the Aorus Master might have this, although I'm not 100% sure, but I think it has it. And then from ASRock, the Taichi should have it. And then MSI, the X870E Godlike should definitely have it. Now, the one that I'm really unsure of is this one. I don't know if the Carbon has the eCLK. So I don't know if it has that. So this one, I don't know. And the other one I don't know is X870E Nova or Taichi Lite. These are the ones that I do not know. I assume Nova doesn't have it. I'm going to go ahead and assume that it doesn't have it. But I don't know if the X870E Taichi Lite or the Carbon have this feature. So these are the motherboards that I think, well, okay, let's leave it at this for now, because these are the ones that I'm pretty sure have the feature. I don't know if the other ones, like the Carbon at $500 should have it, but someone says the Carbon has it, but you don't know. Well, yeah, maybe it has it, but I don't know. But anyway, basically what it does is it allows you to change how the CPU is timed. So instead of using, if you turn this on, what this does is this then goes in band with the CPU and it applies its own 100 megahertz. So typically your clock here is going to start at 100 megahertz, and then the clock that's derived from the PLLs normally would be 100 megahertz as well. So these are all the reference clocks from the actual internal clock. But the external clock allows the CPU, the cores, so in this case on the Ryzen CPU, the CCD can get a different clock reference from the internal clock. So you're basically doing what's called external timing. That is the official terminology. Now, in the overclocking, in the marketing from ASUS and everybody, they call it and even AMD, they call this the asynchronous mode. Because when everything is timed off of a singular reference, then it is a synchronous mode. Everything basically has the same timing reference. But when you switch it over to use the external motherboard reference, now it is asynchronous mode. Because now you can do, like, for example, if I wanted to change this, if I wanted to put this at, say, 101, or let's say I wanted to do 103. I mean, the reason why I'm using 103 is because I'm currently doing this. My very own Crosshair Hero currently is using asynchronous mode, and I'm using a clock speed, a reference clock speed of 103 megahertz for my CPU, whereas everything else is running at the standard 100 megahertz. So this is asynchronous, because now these guys are running at 100, but the CPU cores are running at 103. Therefore, it is no longer synchronized with everything else. Therefore, it is asynchronous mode, and that is where the name comes from. So what this means is you do the math, and you do, for example, like let's say we have a so let's say our standard speed, so like stock speed is 100 megahertz. So meaning my base frequency reference or clock reference, my base clock also referred to as the B clock or bCLK. That is another terminology, but it's basically the reference clock. This equals, well, we'll just leave this here. This equals at stock, this is 100 megahertz because this is derived from the internal clock generator and the internal phase lock loop of the CPU. And if I want to get the stock absolute speed or the Fmax, I would multiply this times the multiplier, the CPU multiplier. And we're going to have to move this down probably, but oh well, I'll just keep it there. So this would be a value of 5,700 megahertz, because this would be 100 megahertz times 57. 57 is a scalar number, or is an integer number, which tells the CPU what the maximum or what the speed of the CPU will run at a given instance in time based off of thermal, headroom, voltage applied, and the actual load or the actual workload that the CPU has to complete, whether we're talking about an all-core Cinebench run or we're rendering a video in DaVinci Resolve, or if we're just playing a game like Final Fantasy XIV or any game really. The multiplier will move around dynamically based off of a number of things. One will be like thermal headroom, load that's needed, or work, the work that the CPU has to do, etc. So this is the Fmax, this value, or this is actually the frequency. This is where you get the advertised maximum frequency. So again, like for example, a 9950X is advertised to support up to 5.7 gigahertz. And this is the math behind how they derive that number. Now, what does this do? Well, this changes, it shifts the Fmax, because now if we want to use the E clock or the base clock overclocking, we're overclocking the base clock by changing the clock speed reference to something greater than 100. So now you simply plug in the numbers. So now, if I plug in the numbers, this new speed will be 5,071 megahertz, which is the product of 103 megahertz times 57. So now this is how I have overclocked the CPU to almost 5.9. Now, you use PBO. Using PBO, you can add an additional 200 megahertz via the override. So which means, technically speaking, the new Fmax that is possible with my overclock is currently 6,071 megahertz, or also known as 6 gigahertz overclock. And that is based off of the 103 base clock times the multiplier plus 200 megahertz. This is base clock. This is the multiplier. And the last thing is from PBO. Precision Boost Overdrive can allow up to 200 megahertz additional speed. Now, this is not a guaranteed number. This basically tells the system, hey, the maximum allowable frequency can be up to an additional 200 megahertz faster. That doesn't mean that it'll actually hit 6 gigahertz. It's dependent on a lot of things. It's dependent on, number one, thermal headroom. Number two, the power limit. And number three, the voltage applied to hit that frequency and be stable. So that is how base clock overclocking works. If you don't have a motherboard that has this, you can still leverage PBO to overclock by an additional 200 megahertz. So this is one of the reasons why people, like overclockers, only really target these high-end boards because they want the ability to run an external reference clock for these type of overclocks, like 6 gigahertz overclocks, for example. Do you have to enable you have to turn it on in the BIOS? Yes, it requires the BIOS. You cannot access it otherwise. Can you use the AI stuff to play Street Fighter 6 for me? Good question. What was that based off of, though? I'm confused on what that was based off of. Basically, use a AI bot to play Street Fighter 6 for you to level you up in multiplayer, in ranked. Man, if I had access to that, I would do that in Tekken 8. I would climb Tekken 8 ladder that way. I would climb up to Tekken God. You can run bCLK 108. So, Jose, you can't really damage the CPU unless... So, here's the thing, guys. Doing this... The worst thing that can happen with doing this is the CPU just crashes. It's just not stable. You're not going to damage your CPU if it's not stable with this type of overclock. The only way you can damage the CPU is if you increase the voltage and you basically, like if you keep increasing the voltage and you also do not improve the cooling, then you can shorten the lifespan of the CPU. But yeah, just by doing this, you can't damage the hardware. The only way you can damage the hardware is by increasing the voltage, which will also increase the temperature. And if you can't keep the temperatures in check and running the elevated voltages, then you're going to shorten the lifespan of the CPU. Remember the saying, heat kills electronics. Heat kills electronics. And what causes an increase in heat? An increase in voltage, an increase in the potential difference, or you're pushing more electrons into the CPU. You're forcing more electrons, meaning, especially if you raise the power limit, you're going to force more current through the CPU, and that, coupled with high temperature, can damage the CPU. More resistance equals more heat as well, yeah. Yes, and that's a good point, Nero, especially if you're trying to do DDR5 overclocking. Because DDR5 overclocking requires, especially if you're running a lot of memory, like you're running like 96 gigabytes, 128 gigabytes, 192 gigabytes, and you're trying to overclock that above 4800, you gotta play around with the impedance values. If you run really high impedance, you're going to burn up your RAM. So keep that in mind. Running high impedance means you're going to increase the resistance, which means in order to drive a signal through the RAM, you have to increase the voltage on the RAM. And that can basically burn out the RAM and damage it over time without high-end cooling on the memory modules. And even then, even if the temperature is normal, if the electronic device is not designed for certain voltages, you're still going to burn it up, even if the temperatures are okay. So that's another thing to be aware of. So voltage can kill electronics. So too much voltage kills electronics, and too much heat kills electronics. Well, dust causes less airflow, and that leads to more heat, and that's what will ultimately kill the electronics. So, anyway, guys, that's probably going to be it. We're right at the 3-hour mark. So, next week, we will probably be covering the new Intel motherboards, because by this time... Oh, actually, one more thing. Let's just briefly show this Gigabyte Aorus Xtreme AI top. So Gigabyte this will be the last thing. And they have the support now, so they show the memory and the SSD. So this is Gigabyte's flagship board. How come the site doesn't like scale properly? I want to like click on this and doesn't like zoom in. That's really weird. Okay. I don't know why their website acts the way it does, but this is the AI top. So Gigabyte today, and they've introduced this brand. It's a new brand segmentation for Gigabyte called AI Top. And it was introduced back at Computex back in June. And there was a Threadripper motherboard that had AI Top. It is an insane motherboard. But yeah, this is their new flagship. This will be the highest end offering for X870E from Gigabyte. This was a little bit late to the party. The Godlike is also kind of missing in action, even though it was announced from MSI. But yeah, the Aorus Xtreme AI Top. This is an EATX motherboard, just like the Godlike and the Tai Chi. So it is a wider motherboard. It has a ton of RGB. It also does not have lane sharing. So if you're someone who absolutely does not want to give up M.2 drives for your graphics card, Gigabyte, the Xtreme AI Top, does not share lanes from the GPU to provide additional M.2 drives. This motherboard will probably be anywhere from $700 to $800. That is the suggested retail price, Jose. So it's going to be very expensive, but it has no lane sharing. There's a caveat though, like the second slot is an X8 slot, just like on the Hero from ASUS, which means if you use the second PCIe slot, it will take half of the lanes from the graphics card. However, that's only if you use the second slot. If you don't use the second slot, you still have 16 lanes, meaning you can fill all of the M.2 drives up on the board and the GPU will still be guaranteed 16 lanes. So this is the only board from Gigabyte that does not take lanes from the GPU to provide M.2 drives. All the other ones that we looked at, they all have that. Just kind of looking at it here, it's got obviously postcode. It has the GPU button. This is a very expensive board. It has all the what do you call it? USB Type A or 10 gig Type A, and then you got your USB 4. You have an HDMI. You have the clear CMOS. You have the flashback, Wi-Fi 7. Here is what's cool. So for those of you that were complaining about the lack of 10 gig LAN, Gigabyte went above and beyond with the Xtreme AI Top. They're providing not one, but two dual 10 gig LAN on the Aorus Xtreme AI Top. This motherboard is the only X870E board that natively offers dual 10 gig LAN. And then it also has optical audio for people that care about that. So fully loaded to the max. It has a full backplate as well. At this price point, you would expect it to have a backplate. So it does have a backplate, and it does look like they are sinking heat from the motherboard to the backplate. So they are actually using the backplate appropriately to get better cooling. Does one need dual 10 gig? Good question, because I kind of question that too. That was my first reaction too. When I saw the dual 10 gig, I was like, wait, what? What? Because that requires an extra PCI Gen 3 lane to give you that second one. Because typically, like for the boards, like for example, the Godlike, MSI's Godlike has 10 gig plus 5 gig. That's 2 lanes of Gen 3 plus 1 lane of Gen 3. So that's only 3 lanes required. However, if you're going to do dual 10 gig, you need 4 Gen 3 lanes. So that's 2 and 2. 2 per 10 gig interface. So, yeah, this is like a thick boy board. Like, this is the thick one. Dual 10 gig, and it's EATX. This is it's got the wide stance. It's got the wide stance. I'm trying to think of a character from like Dynasty Warriors that stood idly with the wide stance. I don't think they have the manual yet. Let me see. Yeah, unfortunately, they have not published the manual, so there's no way to look at the block diagram. We may look at it in a separate piece later on, but let's see what it's got here. So it does. So it's 8-layer PCB, low-loss PCB, 2x copper, premium choking capacitor, 18 plus 2 plus 2. So you got, what, 22 total phases there. 4 DIMM. They're claiming up to 8600 on the RAM. There's not a whole lot. I mean, they just announced it yesterday. So, yeah, it does. Okay, all the M.2s have their own lanes. And yeah, I guess that's pretty much it. It's a pretty straightforward flagship, to be honest. Like no M.2 taking lanes from the graphics card, so that's really nice. That means it's like the Godlike because and the Tai Chi, because those two are also like that. So yeah, kind of an interesting board. They're claiming up to 8600 mega transfers DDR5. Yeah, I don't know if this is actually on the market yet. Like, I feel like it's going to be a couple of weeks. Who knows? I have no idea. They literally just announced it yesterday. It probably does have onboard DAC. I mean, it has optical audio. And actually, in the picture on here, it says line out. It says line out and mic, and then it has SPDIF. So it's got the Toslink port there. But I'll tell you right now, the one thing that impresses me is, okay, my one thing that I didn't like about the Hero only has 6 USB Type A's. How are you going to sell a $700 motherboard that only has 6 USB Type A on the back? I mean, really, ASUS? Really? You're going to, like, what? Like, that was my one problem with that board. This thing has, what, 2, 4, 6, 8. So this has 8. So it adds 2 more. But keep in mind, the Hero doesn't have 10 gig. That is a $700 motherboard that doesn't have 10 gig. Yeah, you're right. It does have more USB-C. So it does have 2 additional USB-C. But most desktop users, like if you're going to plug in USB-C, you're typically going to use the front panel of your case for USB-C. And if you're going to use the back for USB-C, typically the only ones that really matter now are USB 4, because USB 4 offers the higher charging speed or the higher wattage. It offers like the 40 gigabit. So it's like, to me, when I compare the Gigabyte and the ASUS, because this thing and the Hero are in the same kind of category, I got to give the win to Gigabyte when it comes to the back. Like, I would rather have more USB-A than those extra USB-C. On top of that, ASUS has a 5 gig and a 2.5 gig. $700 and no 10 gig. This thing has dual 10 gig. Even if I'm not going to use the second 10 gig, it's still like, you can't really argue against this. Although some people might say, like, why do I need the second 10 gig? I kind of agree, not because I won't use it, but because I feel like they could have better used the lanes for something else. Like, they could have given you another, M.2 or something like the Nova, for example. It could have done something else with those 2 lanes. Dedicated X4 missing on the Hero. The reason why it's missing on the Hero is because they give you slim SAS. The Hero comes with slim SAS. So the reason why the Hero doesn't have that X4 is because of the Slim SAS. The Slim SAS requires 4 lanes of PCIe Gen 4, and that is the reason why the X4 is absent on the Hero, because for some reason they opted for Slim SAS. Slim sus. Yeah, it's very sus. Like, who's gonna use Slim SAS on a consumer like, you know what I'm saying? Like, are you gonna use Slim SAS? I mean, I can think of like a whole bunch of reasons why I need this X4. I can't really think of why I would actually need Slim SAS. Yeah, I don't know what they were thinking. Like, I don't know what ASUS was thinking when they're like, "Hey, let's put a Threadripper thing on a regular Ryzen motherboard and call it a price at $700." You know, like let's do that. That's the smart thing to do. That's what everybody wants. You know, like where's that other board? So hold on, where's that ASUS TRX50 Sage? See, like this motherboard. This is the motherboard that I have for my Threadripper. This is the TRX50 Sage, the WS Pro Series. This thing has Slim SAS literally like right next to me, right here. I'm putting my finger on it. This is the Slim SAS connector on a Threadripper motherboard from ASUS. Why they decided to put this thing on a Hero, on an overclocking board, I have no idea. My guess is maybe they were like, you know what? If people are going to put this motherboard on LN2, it's going to be so cold around the motherboard that maybe they have to run their NVMe off of a cable remotely. You know what I'm saying? Like, even though most overclockers would just use a SATA SSD. Because it's way cheaper and more practical. Instead of an expensive Slim SAS, you know, enterprise SSD, which is like $400, $500 or whatever. So it's like, yeah, I don't know what they were thinking there, man. That's weird. Slim SAS is this adapter right here. The Hero has it. Are the DIMM slots intentionally spaced apart? What do you mean? Oh, on the Aorus? On this? No, they have standard spacing. What they did was they put the... So you can see A2 and B2 have the extra metal reinforcement so that it can get the higher speeds, I guess, compared to the other two. Oh, on the Sage? So the Sage is 4-channel. This motherboard is a quad channel. This is quad channel. 1 DPC quad channel. So you got 2 up here and you got 2 down here. I'm running 128 gigabytes of RDIMM at 6400 on my Threadripper. It's easier to do. So here's the secret, guys. 4 sticks of memory of DDR5 is easier to... It's easier to get 4 sticks running at a higher speed on Threadripper versus like Intel and Ryzen. And the reason why is because it's quad channel. Meaning 4 sticks of memory on Threadripper is like 2 sticks of RAM on Ryzen. If I wanted to do, if I like 4 sticks of memory on Ryzen is like 8 sticks of memory on Threadripper. So for Threadripper, it's way easier to run like 4 sticks at high speeds, like 6400 plus, because it is 1 DIMM per channel. This is channel A, B, C, D. There's no such thing as A1, A2, B1, B2. No, it's A, and that 1 DIMM is only A. Only channel A. Then we got channel B. Then we have channel C and channel D. They all have their own channel, which means it's much easier for the memory controller because they're sorted out on separate channels as opposed to if you run 4 sticks on Ryzen, it's like, hey, I got 2 sticks of RAM on one channel. It's like, okay, hold on. It's basically like, okay, the memory controller has to juggle like 5 different balls at the same time or whatever with Ryzen. Whereas with Threadripper, it's like, oh, I only have like 2 or whatever. It's like way easier to juggle. So yeah, I did a live stream build. So last November, I built this PC live. Like it was a pretty long live stream because I had not touched a Threadripper system in a long time. The last time I built Threadripper prior to this was like 2018, and that was like X399 with an MSI creation or MSI creation motherboard or something. Yeah, like anyway. The DIMMs seem closer to Threadripper. Well, yeah, they're not that far. Yeah. I mean, this PC is like not for, the average person. This is definitely for like virtualization, production work. Like this is an enterprise. This is basically like a what is the market segment they call this? SMB, like small business owner or whatever. It's like an SMB product, like somebody who earns a living using their computer to make things. Like if you're a content creator, you're probably going to be using this, especially if you're like an animator or you're somebody who like really needs like very fast render times, because this thing has quad channel RAM. It like the CPU can go up to 90. What was the upper? I forget what like 64 cores or whatever. But the Pro Series has like 96 cores or something. So it's definitely not for a regular consumer. Like it's completely different segment. This is known as HEDT, also known as high-end desktop. Yes, this is a true high-end desktop. Ryzen and Intel Ultra are not true high-end desktops. They are actually mainstream desktops. Yeah, I mean, and the reality is, like, okay, here's the other thing, too. Like, occasionally, if you guys watch my streams, rarely, every now and then, there'll be that rare stream where I actually stream from the Threadripper PC. And what I can tell you is that you can game on Threadripper, and here's the secret. Like, anybody who is building a Threadripper system, guess what their monitor resolution is going to be? Guess what monitor resolution someone who builds a Threadripper typically would use for like video editing or 3D or whatever? What do you think the monitor that's paired up with Threadripper is going to be? Yeah, 9950X is good for 3D rendering. 32? So 4K. 4K. So typically you'd pair this up with a 4K high-end monitor that has like full, sRGB, color spectrum, wide gamut, accurate colors, etc. So 4K. So yes, what that means, the point of me saying that is if I'm going to be gaming on Threadripper, I'm going to be gaming at 4K resolution. And when you game at 4K resolution, the CPU matters less at 4K because your GPU becomes the bottleneck at that resolution. So the bottom line, what I'm trying to say is when you game at 4K, regardless of whether you're on Threadripper or Ryzen or Intel or even X3D, you're not really going to notice the difference between all of them. This is going to be so close. It's like margin of error across all those CPUs. So if I game on Threadripper, it's basically the same as if I was gaming at 4K on any of those other CPUs. So that's why, like, if you go down to like 1080p, then you're not gonna see the same gaming numbers. Like this will underperform compared to those more energy efficient mainstreams. Because the way I think of it is like, think of it like if you're like in Let's just use Star Wars as an example, or any kind of like sci-fi game or sci-fi storyline. Threadripper is basically like a giant battle cruiser. This thing is like a battle cruiser in space, just zooming around, warp driving, like traveling through space or whatever. The Ryzen CPUs and the Intel Core Ultra CPUs and even the X3D, those are like X-Wings and TIE fighters. Threadripper is like the Death Star. This thing is like a giant like cruiser. This is like a Star Destroyer from Star Wars. So it's not going to be the fastest when it comes to navigating and moving around when it comes to playing games. But it's still going to get the job done at the end of the day. So it's basically this thing can literally do everything. It can game, it can stream, it can do like content creation, it can do like VMs for days. Like, it has RDIMM, it has registered error correcting memory. So you could literally overclock your RAM and be slightly unstable, and you may not even, well, you'd be able to tell because the performance would be underperforming, but it would be correcting the errors in the background. So it'd be like, oh, I'm unstable, but I'm going to fix all the errors anyway. So, that's one of the weird things about it, because it's all about stability. Like, this thing is meant for uptime and stability. Like, this is not supposed to crash. You're not supposed to see Windows blue screening on one of these, because this thing is all about reliability and uptime and productivity. That is what this is all about. So this is a completely different market segment compared to gaming. Yeah, this thing requires error correcting RAM. You cannot plug regular DDR5 in here. This requires something called RDIMM, registered DIMM. So, like I said, it's a completely different market segment. It is not meant for the average gamer. It is not meant for someone who literally just wants to play Call of Duty. Like, that is not what this is. Like, that, let's be clear. That is not what this is. No, you can actually do 1 terabyte of RAM on this. If you want, you could do 100 terabytes of RAM. Or did I say 100? 1 terabyte of RAM. You could do like 256 per DIMM on this. So, not as impressive as the Super Saiyan God, like, epic stuff that we were looking at earlier. Like, these things. It's definitely not as impressive as this. But it is, like, okay, this is like a Death Star. That's a cruiser. Those are basically like X-Wings. Those Intel things are like X-Wings. Like, just flying around in space. This is a Death Star. And Threadripper it's Darth Vader's Star Destroyer. That's basically what this is. This is to play Rocket League. Yes, you can play Rocket League competitively at 4K with one of these and a 4090. So I'll do a video on this motherboard in the future. So, and it'll be about Slim SAS for those wondering. So I have some videos in the pipeline for the channel for those that are curious. We're going to talk about Slim SAS in the future. There will be 2 videos. One video will feature the Sage from ASUS, and the other one, which is actually coming more recently, that one will be featuring the X870E Hero. But yeah, it's been a while since I've actually showcased the Threadripper PC in a video before. Yeah, the UDIMM stuff won't really be able to... Well, you can do that much RAM on UDIMM. It's not going to run fast, I'll tell you that. Like, you're not going to be running 256 gigs of UDIMM at, like, 6,000. I mean, you're not even going to be running it at, like, 5,200. At best, it would be 4,400, maybe 4,800 with that much RAM. Because that's still going to be 2 DPC on, like, AM5 or Intel's socket. They can overclock Threadripper, but I'll tell you, most people don't even bother because like they want it to last a long time, so they don't want to mess with voltages. I mean, I have overclocked it. I have used Curve Optimizer on Threadripper, and it can improve the multi-thread performance. And the crazy thing is because it has so many threads, if you do Curve Optimizer by like just Curve Optimizer -5, -10, your Cinebench scores go up like almost exponentially. Well, not exponentially, but you can see that it could scale way higher than like a standard 8-core, 16-core Ryzen. You overclocked yours? Yeah, I overclocked mine. I mean, I think I have Curve Optimizer at either -5 or -10, depending on the core. So yeah, I mean, I'm using Curve Optimizer with Threadripper. I mean, yeah, you can. All of the PBOS tools, basically, guys, the same stuff that you can do in a regular Ryzen BIOS, you can also do that with a Threadripper BIOS. I mean, that's the beauty of AMD's chiplet design, because it's at the end of the day, it's the same CCDs. You know, it's just a different form factor. In this case, it's a more dense version. It's just got more CCDs, and that's all it is. So you basically Curve Optimizer, Precision Boost Overdrive. Now, if you're gonna mess with PBO, and you're gonna need like some really good cooling, because this thing pulls wattage like a 14900K. Like, so whatever you use to cool a 14900K, you would need that to cool Threadripper if you're gonna overclock it. What's kind of sad about Intel, and again, this says a lot about why Intel's messaging is focused on energy efficiency with the new CPU. Threadripper uses less, on average, while gaming, Threadripper uses less electricity than the 14900K and the 14900KS. Yes, let me repeat that. Threadripper, at least the 24-core, 48-thread that I have, which is the 7960X, that CPU uses less power while gaming than a 14900K at stock. Like, that just shows you that AMD and Intel, when it comes to like 13 and 14th gen versus like Zen 4 and Zen 5, AMD and Intel aren't even in the same universe when it comes to energy efficiency. And that is the reason why. Now, hopefully, that brings the point across why Intel was so heavily focused on the energy efficiency. Why they wanted to bring the power consumption down significantly. Because now, like, the assumption here, although they didn't show how it compares to AMD in power consumption, at least compared to 14th gen, the new Intel CPU uses way less power. So it'll be interesting to see how it actually stacks up against the new Zen 5, because Zen 5 is more efficient than Zen 4. Especially as you go up the stack in terms of the core counts, the core density. Yeah, if you're overclocking Threadripper, you need to have, at minimum, you need to be on a 360 millimeter AIO. Otherwise, you need to be on a 420 AIO or a full custom loop. Otherwise, the only thing that I would do is I would undervolt with Curve Optimizer if I was going to run on regular cooling for that CPU. Threadripper does have postcodes. Every Threadripper board has a postcode. The postcode on this is down here at the bottom. Yes, every Threadripper board has a postcode. It's just not over here because this motherboard uses dual power supply. This motherboard supports 2 separate power supplies for redundancy. Hence what I was saying earlier, it's all about stability and reliability. If one power supply dies, it'll still continue running. But yeah, where's the gallery on this thing? Does it even have one? A workstation Wonderland? I don't know why they don't have like a regular... Man, look at that VRM though. Look at all those phases. That is a lot of phases. Yeah, it has fans. This motherboard, not all the Threadripper boards have fans, but this one has active cooling on the VRM. The nice thing about it is it provides some auxiliary airflow to the RAM as well. Yeah, dual power supply. PCIe power connectors. I think one of them is for like quick charging on the front panel. There's the ECC RDIMM. Ultra fast. Yeah, look at this. I'm actually using like almost every... except for one PCIe slot. I'm using all the PCIe slots. So on the top slot, I have a GeForce RTX 4090 Founders Edition. That's in the top slot. That thing, unfortunately, it's too thick, so I can't use the second slot. And then in the third slot, I have a Radeon Pro W7500 Professional Workstation graphics card. And then in the fourth slot here, this is the X4 slot. This one has a ASUS USB 4 PCIe add-on card. That way, my Threadripper also has Thunderbolt 4 and USB 4 support, just like these X870E motherboards. And then at the very bottom, I have a ASUS Hyper M.2 card for 4 more Gen 4 SSDs. So I'm currently running 7 SSDs on the Sage. And I can add another one. I can add an 8th one because of Slim SAS. So that's what that video is going to be about in the future. It actually doesn't... You'd be surprised. It doesn't use that much heat. I mean, the thing that uses the most power... while rendering is going to be, well, the CPU, yeah, when rendering the CPU uses a lot of power. But if you're using, like, if you're just doing, like, lightly threaded stuff, even if it's just running, like, virtual machines, it isn't actually using that much power. You know, unless you have a lot of CPU requests from a VM, this thing actually, it's very efficient. I mean, I've gamed on it. I gamed on it on a regular basis. I played Dragon's Dogma 2. Most of my Dragon's Dogma 2 playthrough was done on Threadripper. Before all the patches that fixed the CPU performance. Because this thing just brute forced its way. This plus the 4090 brute forced its way through a lot of those unoptimized messes of games. So, you know, that's how developers do it. I'm just going to tell you guys, like developers are using stuff like the Threadripper on their dev stations. They've got like Lenovo ThinkStations and Dell Precision workstations and stuff. I mean, that's what they're using with professional GPUs with the blower style cooler. Yes, ASRock has one and Gigabyte has 2. Gigabyte actually has an insanely high-end AI top. Let me see if I can remember the name of it. TRX50 AI top. Yeah, Gigabyte. Man, you want to see like a super high-end board? Like Gigabyte, man. AI top. This thing is massive. Like, this is an 8-DIMM motherboard from Gigabyte. This is the AI top. This is designed to hold 4 graphics cards. 4 GPUs. All with blower-style cooling, 2 slots each. 1 in each PCIe slot. Every single one of these PCIe slots is full X16, no lane sharing. No compromise. 14 layer PCB. This is what a true workstation / high-end desktop motherboard looks like. Like this is like super heavy duty stuff right here. Active cooling. It's got active cooling fans on all these heat sinks. I mean, there's that postcode. I mean, this, look how wide this is. This is like longer than most EATX motherboards. I don't even know what type of case can fit this board. There's probably only like a handful of mid towers that can even fit this. Most cases would have to be full tower. to fit something like this. How much does it cost? I have no idea. I have no idea. This thing is like 8. This is 8 channel. This is 8 channels. This is still one DPC. So this is channel A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H. 8 channels. You can literally run all 8 sticks at 6400. You can literally run all 8 sticks at 6400. It is near impossible to run 4 sticks on Ryzen and Intel. But on Threadripper, you can literally run all 8 DIMMs at 6400. Because it's 1 DIMM per channel. It's 1 DIMM per channel. That's the reason why it works. Man, yeah, this is what happened to high-end. High-end desktop came back. It came back like with this. This is what I call true high-end. I don't consider a Crosshair Hero true high-end. You know, we were making Dragon Ball Z analogies earlier. Like, see, this is like Super Saiyan God. You know, like that, completely different from like Super Saiyan 2 and Majin Vegeta. Like, okay, you play around there with your little, you know, like have your little rival fight over there in the corner. You know, like this is like God tier stuff. Yeah, I don't even know like how many. I can tell it's dual power supply. So it's dual power. Where's the 14 layer server grade? Very, very low loss. It says very, not low loss, very low loss. Threadripper Pro and 7000. You know the nice thing about this? So like the cool thing is probably next year, sometime next year, Zen 5. The Zen 5 version of Threadripper will come out. So because Turin was announced today. Right, Turin is Zen 5 in EPYC. So that means next year, 5th gen will come to Threadripper. Hopefully, I don't know, but maybe, I would assume, at some point. And the reason why it has to come second is because AMD wants to sell they want to sell to the enterprise. Because that's where all the margin is. Then they'll sell to the high-end desktop and the workstation tier afterwards, so next year. So the nice thing is if anybody has this, they don't have to change the motherboard. You know, they can just do like a drop-in socket upgrade. You're asking me if I ever... Are you asking me or are you asking somebody else? Threadripper... So Threadripper is still... yeah, I have a Threadripper. Yeah, we were talking about earlier. I have the 7960X. I have the 24-core 48 thread. And I have this motherboard, the ASUS Sage. This is what I'm using with my Threadripper. Fully loaded. In fact, this is the computer that has the 4090. What's the best CPU to watch? What do you mean? Like, for what? Ryzen 6969X. See, that's a comment that I shouldn't have even read that. Yeah, no, I mean, I have this. I mean, this is what I use as like the main. This is the main computer, guys. Like, this is the main computer. This is the computer that has my RTX 4090. 4090 plus this is my main machine. So the Ryzen, so the computer that I'm streaming on right now, that's not Threadripper. That is my what I call the Tech Thursday stream machine. So this one is a 7950X3D with an X670E Aorus master with a Sapphire Nitro Plus 7900 XTX. So anyway, so yeah, that's pretty much it. I didn't even expect to talk about Threadripper on this stream. We were mostly going to talk about Arrow. Like, we did talk about Turin, though, so it is kind of related. So anyway, the last thing I wanted to talk about was, I think today, if I'm not mistaken, today was the PlayStation 5 Pro pre-order day for all the other places outside of Sony's website. And I think the 30th anniversary Slim edition sold out instantly. I think. So, that was the last thing I was going to talk about, if anybody was interested in that, because I know there was some discussion about PS5 Pro early on. But anyway, we added a whole nother 40 minutes to this live stream. So we've been going for we're approaching 4 hours. So I'm going to go ahead and call it a stream. So that's going to be it, guys. Yeah, we basically covered all the stuff. Upcoming CPUs from Intel. We will be talking about the Z890 motherboards probably next Thursday, I would say. You can expect that will probably be the main topic next week. Otherwise, yeah, I mean, if you're new to the channel, you like this type of stuff, you like talking about the PC DIY builds and new hardware and overclocking and all that stuff that's interrelated, yeah, get subscribed to the channel. It does motivate me to keep making these type of videos and doing these live streams every week. So that's going to be it, guys. Thanks for watching, and I will see you guys on the next episode of Tech Thursdays. Until then, take care, and I'll see you next time. Thanks.